please.
With pleasure, sir. Mr. Ankuma,
Aye.
Ms. Gill,
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence,
Here.
Mr. Reitinger, Ms. Ward, and Mr. Webb.
Here.
Great,
All right,
thank
thank you. Would you all join me in the pledge?
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Do I have a second?
Second?
All right, thank you. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? No? All right, the agenda is adopted. All right, we're going to start today with a work session down at the table on the school board self-evaluation that Ms. Ward will run, and then we'll come back up here. Anyone have anything before we start? Nope, okay.
Okay.
Thank you all for responding to the survey. And Marty, thank you so much for putting the results together for us. It looks like we have we've got a D+, their overall score, but D+. Yeah, I'm going to be. I'll be fair, but good news is we can remediate. So what I'm going to do is just hit on the lowest scores and start there. We did do well in many areas, particularly, there's a couple that we did okay. We did fairly well on some of these, but the ones I'm going to focus on tonight are, thank you. Okay. The lowest one is number 8, and that is board establishes and maintains a systematic plan for feedback on policies to determine effectiveness, their worth, and whether they need to be amended, modified, or canceled. So my thoughts on going, I'm sorry?
So this is Q8?
Question 1. I'm sorry, sub-question 8. I apologize. Okay. So, yeah, getting back to that.
On the second page,
Yeah,
in pink. I think yours may not be highlighted.
yeah, minus, yeah, so it's on the second page. So my thoughts for addressing these results was to discuss the, where we got the lowest scores, determine why we have those scores, and then get some ideas on how we can improve them. So I'd like to start with this number 1.8, I guess, for lack of a better term. So, anybody want to offer anything on why this is and what we can do to improve?
Just for those of us that have little bad eyes.
Yeah, well, mine aren't. My contacts are all foggy and. Okay, I'll read it again. Okay, so let me give you the topic. So this is under Dimension 1 of the survey, contextual. It's 1.8, and the question is, or the metric is, the board establishes and maintains a systematic plan or feedback on policies to determine effectiveness, their worth, and whether they need to be amended, modified, or canceled. We get a 5 on that one out of 10. Anybody have anything to offer on this? I don't think we have anything formal in place for reviewing policies. This might be something we would like to establish. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on how to go about doing it?
I think to get to part of this, we do have a plan for reviewing. I think we need to have Tony explain, because a few years back, when Tom came into his new position, we set sort of a rolling examination of policies to see what was out of date, what needed to be done, what needed to be brought into compliance. And I think Tony's the best one to explain what that is.
We do actually have a schedule for reviewing policies because it is a lot. You can't do it all at the same time. But I will say, with the workload that we've had, it has been a challenge to actually keep on that schedule over the last couple of years. So it won't hurt to go back and review it again, but it is very outlined what policies you review on which years and the order that we go in. And we've had it now, I guess, for 3 years.
So one of my questions on this is, it says the board establishes, so, I mean, this predates me because I wasn't on the board. Did the board establish the plan? Okay.
Actually, when we, originally, the board didn't have anybody that did policy. And so you either had to contract it at like $85,000 a year just to do little bits of policy, or during the recession, what happened is it all fell on the staff. So the staff in their departmental areas would, like Lisa would get personnel policies, somebody else would get something else, and everyone was trying to cross-reference it to VSBA. That was one of the reasons that Tom's Horm's position was put in, was specifically for policy. And at that point, that's when the board went through, okay, what does it look like? How can we have a reasonable plan? Because actually, in 2011, coming out of the recession, we probably had a policy stack, not a foot high, but not pretty close. Yeah, it really was pretty close. That was about the first admin meeting I had, actually. We all talked about the policy because everyone was overwhelmed. And so getting through all of that, we just knew we couldn't do it even in 24 months. So the board did set out a criteria, set out a plan, and I think it's actually in your handbooks. I'm almost positive, but I can certainly get the copy out to everybody so that you can review it.
Is everyone comfortable with that, with what we have in place right now? Is there anything you'd want to change? Would you change your answer knowing what you know now?
I guess what I would be asking is, I've in the last year especially, we've seen policies being reviewed, amended, changed, as we've had the time to do it. I mean, budget season, we don't see too much of that, but otherwise we see policies on trips, the Chile and the China trips. We see policies on the advisory boards. We've seen policies on a number of things. So I guess maybe I'm struggling with this 5 rating that we got and wondering what is it sort of, the 5 has to be benchmarked against something. And if we've been improving it, why do we have a 5? And more importantly, is there much more we could improve it, much more we could do other than what we're doing now?
That's a good point. I just want to point out, too, some of these questions, I feel, can be interpreted differently. I think they're sort of broad at best, and so you might read it with one thought in mind, and someone else will read it with something else in mind.
Well,
So,
yeah, and I would say, like, I didn't know there was a plan. So part of that, I think, goes to the communication questions on here. So you're a new member. I didn't know there was a plan. I didn't know, I mean, yes, we have it. I didn't know we had a plan. I didn't know there was some, so for me to say, I don't know, we rarely do that because I've never reviewed a plan for reviewing the policies or known there was a plan. So that's why my thing was, it's not that I think the process is bad. I didn't even know there was a process. I knew that we'd been reviewing them. I didn't know if it was ad hoc or if it was according to some larger scheme.
Right, so it really gets down to is the biggest problem here, the word systematic, because it seems like, I mean, how many people here knew there was something in writing? I knew they had established something so that Tom would start bringing things around, but how many knew there was something in writing and had read it?
So, I know about the policy. Since I spend a fair amount of time reading the policies, I see the note on the FCCPS webpage that says what the schedule is and what years we're going to be looking at things. I can't say I've gone in and read the underlying schedule behind that, but I know that there's a regular schedule. But that's really more about what the board's doing. I think this question gets more to what are our mechanisms for determining the extent to which there are problems in the implementation of certain policies, because it talks about feedback, systematic plan for feedback on policies. And I might be wrong about this, but I think the vast majority of school board policies don't rise to the level of any great public concern. They do on controversial areas, but I think generally the policies are much more important to the staff than they are to the public. I think it changes from time to time, but it's kind of hard. It would be difficult for us to go out and regularly ask the public, what problems do you see in school board policies? Because I don't know how they'd answer that question. I think there are ad hoc things that come up that we need to have a mechanism for addressing. For example, the recent controversy around prior review on the George Mason Lasso. And there are other issues like another one is the extent to which we have commercial awards. Those are all issues of policy that we ought to be able to sort of collect and answer. I do think we probably ought to have a standard means of identifying concerns that the staff have with implementation of the policies or that advisory committees identify with the policies within their areas of expertise. So I don't know if the administration right now has as we go through the review cycle, asked the responsible staff members whether or not they see problems in the policies that could be fixed, which strikes me as something that might be worth considering. And secondarily, whether we have as a part of the standard, I'd have to go back to look at the policy, the standard requests for advisory committees that they make recommendations regarding school board policies in their areas of authority. Those are the things that strike me as the most reasonable to do that actually might return value.
Well, I think you raised the trip policy, and I think having Tony explain, how staff input was received on that would be good. Because I know on a lot of policies, they do ask, because obviously it's affecting staff in a huge way.
Yeah, if it's a policy that does involve staff, and that's a prime example, when that's had, 12 months of discussion, because it is so huge and has a big impact on how things especially operate at George Mason. So anything that's like that, we do get staff input. It could be, if it's a policy that is more, something that a principal is going to use, for instance, we would have it at our division leadership. We meet every month, so we would get input from them. It really just depends. Some of the policy is more of just updating, which you guys, see that. We tend to model the VSBA recommended language. So most of the time, it's not site-specific or, specific just to Falls Church. It's what is recommended by VSBA.
Sorry, and then getting to the advisory committees, that is one of their roles, is to review policies that affect their population, their responsibility. How clear is that made at the beginning of each year when you've got a new committee or new members or something like that, that, there are things you're supposed to be looking at and you've got the ability to have input?
In all honesty, I would say that our advisory committees don't review a lot of policy. They meet so little, really, in the time that they have. They're usually focused on student issues not that policy is not, that's why policy is there, but it's generally what sort of event are we going to host for our ESOL families? And, they're really planning things they think are going to, that are going to help impact the instructional aspect. Not that we couldn't. And we have had some input on policy, but I would say it's actually fairly minimal at the advisory level. And it just has to do with how often they meet, or how little they meet, really. Once a month.
Well, should we have the review policy come to us and have it explained and see whether that's how we think it should be going forward? Because that's at least 3.5 years old at this point. And I know part of it is when a problem comes up, like, the trip policy or something else pops up, suddenly it goes to the top. I think one of our biggest problems with the policy is if you look at the dates on a lot of them say 1974, because when they were changed before, nobody bothered to change the date to show that they were updated. So people look at some of these things and they go, seriously? You haven't updated them since 1974? Which obviously isn't true, but, what would you think of having our review policy come to us and see if that's still what we want to do, since it's now easily 4 years old?
And you will have a new attorney, so that might be a good task for the new person, that is a beginning task.
Yeah, because part of it is, how do you triage a bunch of out-of-date things when you can't necessarily tell what the dates are either, to say we're going to go and, start chipping away at the oldest, when the dates may not even tell you what the oldest is.
Could we have could we task the advisory boards with reviewing the policies relating to them and updating them for even the review, even if there were no changes and they did a review, could we then change the 1974 to 2016?
Well, I think part of Tony's point was they don't generally get that involved in policies because
They don't know the legal,
they only meet during the school year and they don't meet that often. And then we've got tasks that they've got laid out related to, the students in the programs. So the question is, would we be sort of losing a year for our advisory committees if we turn that over? And then there are the legal questions of, they would not be the ones to know what you legally can and can't do. And I think we need a policy first to figure out what we're doing overall.
That really is the main work of the board. That is the role of the school board, is to set policy and, as a governing body. So I think that,
Yeah, we've got 3 functions. One is policy, one's budget, and, hiring superintendent, so.
I would say my experience has been slightly different, and maybe this predates Lawrence, who's now on the daycare advisory board, when I spent 5 years before the school board. But at least I remember 2 things that we changed, I think. We changed the membership criteria from all 7 members having to be parents whose kids were in the system, and made that a majority. So a change like that, we made that. And then I believe there was another change, I can't think of it, but something sticks in my mind about other change. So yes, I mean, it was, John, to your point, it was triggered by a certain event, because membership of the board was an issue, and I made the motion, listen, I'm leaving, but if you change it to a majority, then I can stay. And so they did. Now,
Right, well, I think the daycare board has certain autonomy that others don't. I mean, we've had other advisory
Okay.
committees who tried to change their membership, who tried to be the ones to add their own members, but daycare is a different.
okay, all right.
Yeah, and they are, just in terms of, the VSBA, and not every school system has, has a daycare program, and so they're not one of those that are listed along with like the special ed advisory and the gifted advisory.
So they're more an SAO than a school board advisory committee. Okay.
I like Dr. Jones' idea to let the new attorney do it. I mean, as an attorney, this was often my job, was helping a new GC go through their policies and make sure they're in compliance with law and that they're updated to reflect everything, and then go through them on more substantive issues. So that could be a great project to start with, and then that attorney can come to us with ones that are not, once they triage out the ones that are just updating for legal issues or changing the dates, they could come to us with some that are more substantive.
Yeah, because let's face it, a lot of the ones Tom's brought us, it's, here are the 5 changes that we legally have to make to become compliant, and it's not a substance issue at all. It's just, change the date or you're not legally in compliance, but even if you're not legally in compliance, you're still bound to obey the law that you don't have written properly in your own policy, so it's kind of silly not to get it right. So, okay, then we'll put that on Tom's plate to get going as he leaves.
Tom or the new Tom?
Well, I'm assuming Tom is going to have a nice list for the new Tom.
So let's move on to dimension number 2, which is educational. There are 3 areas here what I'd like to discuss. The first one is item number 1. Board assigns new members a mentor, and let me read it on here. Board assigns new members a mentor to help them learn the ropes and provides new members with detailed explanation of the board's mission. We scored a whopping 2.29 on that one. Your thoughts?
We just flat out, we just don't do it. I think this particular time around, it was probably more difficult to do that because of so many of us, Michael, myself, Margaret, were pretty much still new ourselves. So there wasn't much rope learning for you all if you're going to come from us. But I think we do potentially need to improve upon that to China so that when a buddy system, so that when you all have questions or as the transition happens from member-elect to being sworn in, that if you have an opportunity to ask some questions in advance before you get here, or whoever gets here, I think with an election coming up this fall 17, I think we may need to work on some type of plan to potentially do that and do a better job of it. But I think that's definitely why I think that one, I know for me, that was why it was on the lower side, because it was something that I know we really don't do.
Well, this is true, and I think, we're all sent to, a new board member orientation that's held by the VSBA, but I think it's important that we know what's going on in our community. I mean, that orientation gives you the broad picture of what your job is as a school board member, but it doesn't really go into the details of what's happening here in our community and how things run. I know I would have benefited from something like this, and I think all of us would have, and I would actually like to see something like this in place, particularly, like you said, it's an election year, some of us will be cycling out. It's important to have something in place for the new members so the board can continue running smoothly, hopefully, and those new members aren't as overwhelmed with the task of learning so much. There's so much to learn about being on the school board. It would be nice to have a mentor or program where we focus on the most important items first and then, and go from there. to get everybody up to speed as quickly as possible. Thoughts?
Well, one thing we did, starting a couple of years ago, wasn't the mentor program, which we really, really, really need to do, was when Susan was chair, you know, when you three were coming on, she had set up, between the election and the first time you were seated, she set up sessions where you guys would come in and she'd talk about budget, or she'd talk about, you know, something else, so that at least you hit the ground running with more background than you would otherwise, which is good and needs to be done, but that's separate from, once you get in the chair, having somebody you can go to, which to me makes complete sense, because, yeah, I looked at that and I thought, wouldn't that be nice? I mean, because I knew Susan so well, I mean, she ended up being that for me, and I think for some others, but we should have something that's not just dependent on who you already knew before you got on here.
Also, I think that one of the biggest changes that needs a new structure is starting in January. I mean, when we had new board members starting, and it was July 1, and we had from July to, you know, January to kind of everybody to get used to working together and get ready with the budget now, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to be reorganizing and starting the budget on the very day everybody starts officially on the board. But so it may need even more thought of, is there a better structure altogether?
I see it a little differently, and I think there are a couple of models. You can do the Phil Reitinger approach, where you start from January 1 before the election, and for a long time, I swear I thought Phil was a reporter, because he was always there and basically learned everything there is about the system. That's one approach. I'm not sure how many people can do the Phil Reitinger approach. The other one, for me, is once you are essentially a candidate, you know, make yourself available, because and ask a lot of questions, which is what I did. I mean, it didn't hurt that at the time we were, you know, we didn't have much opposition in our time, but we were actually invited by Susan, who was the chair at the time, to come in and sitting on meetings and knowing that we were going to be on there, give us as much information as we could. We couldn't vote, but at least we were part of the information gathering. And so I'm struggling with how you create a sort of like a mentor-protege relationship with all that's going on with a full-time job, with school board meetings, even after that. Because I think it's out there. You make the best of, you make the most of what it is. I mean, I ask questions. I'll call John. I'll call Justin. I'll talk to my fellow board members, even today, to get information. So I don't know how much more you formalize it once you're on the board, but I'm open to ideas. So.
So I think we are all in agreement we need something in place for the new board members that will be taking office in a year and a half from now, no less. So we have some time to work on this. But like you said, I've done it informally too, and I have to thank Susan Carney. She was a huge resource for me, and she met with me every time I asked her. She was great. So we need that we need someone to do that for all the board members at the same time and get them up to speed. So we can probably put this on a future, as a future agenda item. Sound okay to everyone? Yeah? Okay. All right. The next number under educational is number 4. At least once every 2 years, the board has a retreat or special session to examine its performance. This got a 4.86. Comments?
I think the fact that this is the first time we're doing a self-evaluation like this, as far as I know, pretty much explains that, because it just hasn't happened. I mean, there have been, I'm trying to think, there have been some retreats, but they have not been or have not included this kind of purpose. So, I mean, having a retreat just for this, I think, would be a bit overkill, but making this part of something a little bigger than a work session before a meeting, I think would be a good idea. Anyone else? Gabriel, you can talk whenever you want to, so.
So I'll just say one thing here. I would actually be against a retreat on board performance unless we had metrics. I mean, unless we had a real set of targets that we were going to want to shoot for. I mean, I'm happy to sit around and talk about how we could do better and interpersonal relationships and governance and all of those sorts of things, but a discussion about board performance is really a discussion about governance to me, and we've had retreats on governance, unless you've got targets that you're talking about and things that you want to manage to, and you can have sort of a real discussion. If that's, so I always viewed the discussion we're having now as sort of a preliminary stage setter discussion. I do think we need real metrics to measure our performance as a board, and they're in some sense similar to the performance of the school system, because we ought to judge how we do by how the school system does. So that's kind of where I come from on this. I think if we build out significant metrics for the school system and we don't meet them, that's not that's not a finger-pointing exercise at the administration. It's also an opportunity for us to sit down and figure out how we want to work better as a board so that we meet the metrics that we want. But that's just my personal opinion. Thank you.
No, I agree. Like I think a retreat just for this would not be overly helpful. I mean, I'll be honest. 2 years ago when I went down to VSBA for I can't remember what, I talked to Gina. I wanted to find somebody who could do an outside evaluation of a school board. And oddly enough, everyone had the same reaction. Wow, that's a great idea. Never heard of that. And so, when Margaret came up with this, I thought, okay, this is a great start, but in terms of metrics, I would love to have, I can't imagine, I don't understand why there aren't groups, former educators, former administrators, or whoever, who do this, where you go out and talk to stakeholders, but we don't have that. So I think the only metrics we would have is how's the schools performing. So, yeah, but just a retreat to navel gaze about this, I would be otherwise occupied.
And then the last one I wanted to talk about under educational is number 10. And this again goes back to, we just haven't done it. Board has discussions about the effectiveness of its performance. I think we have done this informally on certain things, but not across the board, and certainly not on a regularly scheduled basis. So unless someone has anything to add to that, we can just go ahead, move on. Phil? All right. So dimension number 3 is interpersonal. I'm so sorry. I did it. Oh, yeah. Oh, good. That one doesn't count. So looking at numbers 8 and 9. I'm going to get this down here. Okay, number 8. The board has adopted some explicit goals for itself, distinct from district goals. We got a 4.29 on that, and as far as I know, I don't think we ever had any explicit goals set for ourselves. We tend to judge our performance based on how the district goals are progressing. Any thoughts on this one?
Actually, I've got a question for people. The priorities that the board sets out that we're going to talk about today, I see those as our goals, and I think it's clear that other people don't. So I'm trying to figure out, is there a semantic difference between the priorities? Because they do lay out our goals to me. So I'm trying to figure out how people could think that we never do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the distinction is this says distinct from district goals. I would agree with you very much that the priorities that we discuss are in fact our goals, but they're also the district goals. So I
can you think of a goal that would be distinct from district goal? Maybe that's the problem I'm having, is it seems like none of our goals should be distinct and separate.
So, just briefly, in the priorities document, we get to some things that could be. For example, the teacher survey results that reflected that teachers did not think they had an adequate voice in the budget process. I guess that would actually be a district goal too, so I withdraw that comment. But there could be community engagement goals for the board that would be different from district goals. But that's a razor thin difference between the two. So I take your point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think if there were any of our goals that were distinct and separate from the district goals, I would look at it and go, that's not a goal for the school board, because if what we're doing doesn't support the district, and I don't know if you've got any other ideas, Tony, it seems to me that if we had goals that were distinct from the district goals, that would be a mistake.
Would the civility pledge be
Yeah.
Well, I guess to me, no, because it's supposed to make us work better as a board, work better with the community, work better with, I mean, the whole thing is supposed to help us support the division. So that's what I'm trying to
But
figure
I
out.
think you could have a distinct goal of a community engagement goal for the school board that is just a goal for us operating as a body. So a goal of 100% participation in Run for the Schools. No, which I keep plugging. But, so you can think of some things like that. They're like, we're going to try to go to the tailgate. I couldn't make it to the tailgate last week, and I wish I could have. We're going to try to make it to the tailgates, or we're going to, try to be out and about in the community. So those are some goals we could have as a body that's a elected, public-facing body that are distinct from the goals of the district.
And I think you can have school board goals that are like the VA trainings that are expected, and you'll have some school board members who will actually embrace those trainings and go to the sessions and grow and learn as a school board member, and then there are some that don't take advantage of that. And I think what you're talking about as far as like getting out at events or things of that nature that are kind of quantifiable for a board member, that could be different in how you're actually participating as a board member, could actually be some very simplistic goals that, but they're very measurable to see if the board is actually working on their own learning and growing to be a board member. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, that's very, very astute. Thank you. I think, yes, learning and growing are goals that we should focus on, I think, just to be the best we can be as a board, not just as, in what we do in our jobs, but in how we interact with each other and with the community. I know a lot of us do attend a lot of community events, and it's always nice to see other school board members at events. So I think that one, we should look into that one later down the line.
Legislative liaison?
Yeah. It's a lot. Okay. All right, so we'll table that one. We'll revisit that in the future. Number 9, the board provides biographical information that helps members get to know one another better. I don't know. Anybody have any comments on that?
Can we replace that with happy hour?
That could be a goal. 100% participation.
I mean, getting a resume would not have helped me. I knew a number of you and through campaigns. We're a small town. I don't think this is important in terms of like just getting resumes. I think, some social events, if they passed legal muster and we didn't have an open meeting, to sit together and have a glass of wine or a beer or a non-alcoholic beverage of your choice would be a good thing to do, to just talk about things and develop interpersonal relationships. But I mean, I would actually love to see something like that if we would not go to FOIA jail. So,
Could you notice like a school board happy hour? I don't know, I don't know, or coffee hour, or something like that, you know, you notice it as a meeting and we're there and we're talking and members of the public can also, if they wanted to stop in and talk.
Whether or not, if we're actually truly just socializing with each other versus we have to make sure we don't teeter on just, you know, hey, what's going on, Phil, with your kids? kind of question.
Yeah, and actually, when we had the training for the special ed committee, the trainer from VSBA came down, or not VSBA, the VDOE, said, you know, you all should get together outside of the committee meetings. And, you know, people said, obviously, what about FOIA and public meeting? And he said, as long as you're not doing committee business, you know, you're talking about kids and all that kind of thing, you can do it. I mean, what we'd have to be ready for is all the people who are going to immediately say, we're violating FOIA. I mean, we would just need to go in, you know, rather expecting criticism along that line, because obviously we would get it, but, you know, it is doable.
Yeah. Okay, we'll make sure it's in there. So, okay, I think we should explore that. The other thing, though, when I read this, I've known several of you for several years, even before we were on the board together, and you know, it'd be really nice to have like a little bio blurb or something about, you know, your spouse, the number of kids you have, what you do for a living, you know, that kind of thing. It's always nice to know somebody's background for other than just prurient interest. I think it's just kind of nice to know who you're talking to. I mean, how many people would have known that, you know, Aaron and I have law degree or lawyers? No one really knows that because I teach now. So, I mean, like that kind of information is something that, you know, I think is nice to know. It's nice to know who you're talking to and what, you know, what that person's expertise is. Well, maybe we could work on some kind of bio list or something. We could even post it on the website. Okay. Strength. All right. Let's see. Okay, now we're going to Dimension 4, analytical. Number 1, under Dimension 4. I've been in board meetings where subtleties of issues dealt with escaped the board. Use the reverse scale for this question, with frequently being 0 and never being 10. We are right at 5, so it's...
And that one is the reverse one, and when Marty was doing this, we weren't real sure everybody interpreted that correctly. You remember that? Like, it was only the first question?
Yeah, right.
We wondered if that's why it was 5, because
And-
nobody really knew.
Yeah, it's just, I think the question, the way to answer it, and you're used to answering on a, you know, 0 to 10, or the 10's the highest, and now all of a sudden you're switching it, it could have been confusing. I don't know, do you feel like subtleties of issues escaped the board? Anybody feel like any subtleties escaped us? I can't recall anything, but.
I'll be the first to say, I got very confused and sent Tony notes about the one where we had to reverse the scale, and I'm not at all convinced I got it right. I mean, can some subtleties escape us? Sure. I mean, part of the problem is if they've escaped you, how do you know them? But, I mean, do people, separate from the score, I guess the question is, do people think this is a sort of ongoing problem, that there are subtleties or nuances that we are missing? And if so, what do we do about it? Michael?
I'm not sure the subtleties escape us. At least usually some of us may have a better understanding of one issue or another, depending on where they're coming from and the level of detail or time invested in this. I think, frankly, the words in caps is what throws everybody off. Because I remember, I think I sent mine in, and Monty said, "You did it the wrong way, so go back and do it again." So, yeah, I did. So, but I'm not sure I did it the right way. Exactly. So,
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing, if we do something like this again next year, and this is in SurveyMonkey, could we just make this a regular question rather than making it reverse everything to make it extra confusing? I mean, I first looked at it, it's one of those things where if you're worried people are going to answer everything by saying, on like a medical chart, no, 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 sometimes you give them an answer that forces them to look at what they're choosing again. But this didn't seem to be the case, so it just really seemed gratuitously confusing to me.
It's easy to switch that SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, so unless people are going to say we've got a serious problem, I think you're right. Some people know certain issues better than others, and if you are that person, you should say something. If you think other people are missing something that they should know, then it's your responsibility to point it out to them, and then they can decide whether or not that affects what they do.
and I think as a board we do. I mean, I think we hear from different people on different subjects because people have a better understanding of the different aspects of running the school system. So,
Yeah, okay.
Any other comments on that one? I just want to point out a strength on this one, because I feel like we have to, point out strengths too. We get it sweet and sour, right? Number 8 on this is the board does not present new issues of a complex nature for immediate action. That is definitely something we do not do, which is good, because it takes time to digest complex issues, and we want to make the best decision we can for our school system. So thank you all for that. I'm going to go down to the next, number 5. That would be number 10. The board handles issues that are ambiguous and complicated by appointing committees to conduct in-depth research. This got a 4.8, and I don't know how many. I know we did have one subcommittee on the school board that did do an investigation and research. I don't know how often these opportunities come up, but we're looking at less than a 5 on this one. So comments?
I'm not aware that we do this. That would be my comment. So maybe we do, and it hasn't happened in the months that I've been on the board, but.
Yeah, I guess part of the question is, how do you interpret a committee? Because, for example, for GM, we set up the task force, but it wasn't a board task force. It was, 2 of us and 2 of the council and the EDA and the planning commission. Well, and then the question is, do you include the fact that we have all these advisory committees already, and what would there be outside of those? I mean, the other thing is, we had a discussion 2 years ago, I think, about whether or not there should be board committees. Because, on the city council, they've got a bunch of committees. And we brought in, city staff and city council members, and we talked it through, and we really didn't think that board committees would be of any real use. I mean, Michael, you were on the chamber board, or when you were head of the chamber, you had a board of 30, 32? And then you had committees who actually did things and were responsible for bringing not decisions back, but recommendations back, and they were generally listened to, because not everybody could be an expert on everything. But for us,
right.
Even if we had, 3 people who were assigned to look at something, the bottom line is, we all felt that we all had to be completely informed as well to make the decision. So by setting up committees, Doug Eady, who we've all read, said committees are great, but he also said the good size for a committee is 7. So we are a committee of a larger group. but also just staff-wise, the staff would be staffing the committee and going through all those meetings, and it would come to the full board, and in effect, they would have to do it all again because the remaining members would have to be as informed as everybody else. So I think here the question is, did people include the advisory committees? Because we do have committees that already cover a lot of things, so how many issues arise where we have to appoint something new as opposed to sending it to something that already exists? I mean, I looked at this and other than the GM thing and stuff like ASACs for TJ. Yeah, I mean, we had, the special ed investigation, and I guess, that, yeah. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't even have considered that a committee. So I guess, do people have a full understanding or agreement on what this even meant? Because to me, we don't have board committees, and we've pretty much decided we won't. And we have a lot of advisory committees that pretty much seem to cover what we need. And then if GM comes up, we don't do something just on our own.
So I would only say that I think even before we're finished with this, let's understand that with some of these questions or some of these numbers, it's not so much that I don't say we're doing a bad job as much as some of it is not as applicable as, we make it seem. So maybe some of these need to be revised to say, this is not what we do, or this is not something that comes up, rather than sort of rate us, on a poor scale. So just throwing that out. Yeah.
I thoroughly agree, and really truthfully, if I had more time, I would have, tailored these questions to our board, but that's one of the things I hope everyone is going to consider tonight when you're looking at this and going, what does that mean, or that really doesn't apply in this particular situation. When we do this again, we're going to revise this, and we're going to tailor it, but we had to start somewhere. So it's a painful exercise, but, birth usually is, so giving birth to this new thing. So we're going to, we're going to.
5 people here just going, don't get that.
Trust me, I know, just trust me. So anyway, and again, number 10, the way I interpreted it was how you did. We have advisory committees. We don't, and we did the GM sub. Well, I don't even know if it was considered a subcommittee, but we do advisory committees, and I think that is where we, how we are able to handle all the tasks that we're given. If we didn't have those advisory committees, we'd be, at a loss. So that's how I interpret number 10, but some of you, I think, interpreted it as having committees of board members. Okay, so this is one of those questions we're going to have to streamline. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Dimension number 5, which is political, we have really no super low areas. We have a couple 6s, but they're high 6, well, other than one high 6. I don't plan to address any of these unless someone feels very strongly about addressing any of these under Dimension 5. Okay. And, okay, so moving on to Dimension 6. We've got pretty high grades on this one, strategic, so we're doing something right. Again, we have a couple of 8s. The lowest one was the first question under this dimension, and it reads, the board devotes more time to putting out fires than it devotes to preparing for the future. Again, this is another one of those reverse scales. So if it was answered correctly, we got a 4.43 on this one. Comments?
was going to say, we can only deal with what we're presented with, and we have a few fires in front of us between now and the end of the year. So we'll deal with it accordingly. But again, it's one of those, I'm not sure if it's more what we don't do as a practice or what is not a regular occurrence. You know, it's not a regular occurrence to have a superintendent leave, or it's not a regular occurrence to have resignations, or a regular occurrence to fill certain key strategic positions. I mean, last year was a crazy time where 3 superintendents had to be, we're not used to that on a regular basis. So again, let's sort of put this in context in terms of not putting out fires, but, again, I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, to me, putting out fires means you're dealing with things that are unexpected and a surprise. And I think relatively speaking, we don't have that many. We have a lot of things that need to get put out simply because they're hot issues and we have to deal with it. But I don't see that many suddenly popping up that are completely unexpected.
All right, I just would like to add a comment on how I interpreted this. Whenever I read or think of putting out fires, it's usually because you didn't put the procedures in place first to prevent those fires. I don't feel that that is the case with us, and things do come up, things happen, and we deal with them. Again, I think because this is a reverse scale, I think the numbers might be inaccurate. Okay. Any other comments on this one? Well, we got through it. We are finished. Any last words from anyone, and shall we move on?
Yeah, I guess any questions that somebody once raised, whether or not the score was good? And then the secondary question is, what do you think about doing this again if it's a little more tailored to us as opposed to, a generic one?
I'm going to say I was skeptical in the very beginning, but having gone through this, I see I'm starting to see its value, but I will say, to Phil's point, or should I say, we should consider what Phil said about having some sort of metrics. And so I don't know if the word is clean this up or sort of review it and say, all right, we'll keep some of it, but the other stuff that may be not so applicable, we amend or delete, but let's come up with, let's sort of refresh this and come up with something that we can now start to work with. Like Phil said, we'll do this if only we have something to benchmark against it, like we have a target, so then we can measure against it. But if we don't, it's kind of amorphous, if you know what I mean.
So would you all be willing to maybe break this down by section and address it at different work sessions, maybe one a month, and refine it and clean it up and add the metrics? I can't see working on this entire thing in a work session, but I think we should start somewhere. Comments?
Not to take a cue from the paper, but could we have a person who took that on as an assignment? The reason is, I think going through and trying to group draft this sort of thing will be very difficult. It'd be much better to work from a proposal that someone put together. And to be completely honest, the next year looks pretty crazy with all of the things that are coming up. And so I would be not disposed to devoting multiple work sessions to refining a survey instrument. I'm going to be crisis-driven on this one in response to the question that, really deals with the most important stuff we've got before it. I think metrics and targets are important, including for the board, so if we could have something that was prepared, that let us work from a straw man at least, that's certainly something I'd be happy to do, but multiple work sessions, I wouldn't do that for this year.
I'm not trying to slough this off. It's just, this is overwhelming for me, and I'm getting all kinds of input from all of you. I'm not psychic. I can't guess what you want. I got a better idea now because, from your input, but I could sit there and spin wheels, and I don't have that kind of time. I don't know about you guys, but I don't. I would need some help, even if it was just working with another member. I'd be happy to put something together, but I need more direction. Otherwise, this will take me an inordinate amount of time.
So could I volunteer to help work with you on this one? And to Phil's point, have the questions or suggestions or ideas directed to us, and then we come up with something that we could present to them, because it'd be more productive that way, where you and I could work offline, but then share a draft or revision with the rest of the committee, and then that way our time is used for other things and not sort of in a public session. But I'll volunteer to work with you.
Okay, I'll sign you up. So I would like to do this by dimensions, and again, when I can get it done, but I will do my best, and if you want to submit comments just on dimension 1 to both Michael and me, and we will incorporate your suggestions as best as we can, and we'll present them at another meeting. Or just do it online. Since we already, we've established that we're doing this, and everyone's gotten a chance to see the questions. Maybe when the final product is ready to be presented, we can present that at a meeting. What do y'all think?
I just say, let's be very careful to not have an online meeting or anything that would cause a problem, but, as long as we get, I'm sorry. I understand, but let's just make sure that you and Michael get some guidance from Tom before he turns into a pumpkin about how to proceed and whether it's one-on-one comments or otherwise, to make sure that we stay on the right side of open meetings rules.
Yeah, no, I have no problem with that, and that's a really good suggestion. But what I'm saying is, if we can't get your input at a meeting, we have to get it somehow. So you're going to have to email us both, or just email one of us, and we can share that information, however Tom wants to handle this. But we need input, and if we don't get input, we'll just do what we think is best, I guess, and then let it be at that.
I think we can work with Tom and help us get some guidelines and some timelines, even if we have to ask members to give us comments on dimension 1 by a certain date, and then on the 2 by a certain date, or just throw everything in the bucket by a certain date. So I guess you and I can work with Tom offline to get on this one.
Any other comments, questions? Anything?
Tom?
Tom?
Okay, anything else? Okay, then we'll head back up.
That's all right.
Okay, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program. Right now, we'll go to public comment. In accordance with School Board Bylaws 2.3, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to board members. And for the record, we have 2 speakers. First, Rich Butler. Second, Allison Kutchma. If you could just state your name, address for the record. I mean, obviously, I already said your name. It seems kind of silly, but please humor me.
It's green, it's on now. I live here in the city with my wife and 3 kids. One of them's already graduated from the high school. I first want to say thanks to everybody. I know you probably all get paid, but I consider this great work. When I was in private practice as an attorney, which I still am, I used to joke that nobody has a great day and calls me up saying, I'm having such a great day, I want to call my attorney. And I have to imagine the same thing's true for a school board. Nobody's having a great day and says, I'm going to come to a school board meeting and tell everybody what a great job you guys are doing. So to contradict myself, why I'm here is a problem that I see that I think needs to be addressed with respect to transportation, with respect to the middle school and the high school. This year, we changed to a common bell schedule where both of the schools are discharged at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And when that happens, the buses take the middle school kids home first, and then basically 30 minutes later, they come back and pick up the high schoolers. And the high schoolers are standing out, 25 yards from Route 7, about 250 or over 250 kids are out there standing, waiting for a school bus. I know from talking to my children, a lot of them who are ticked off are walking home early. I don't think we're providing the bus services for them, having them wait for 30 minutes. When I was in law school with Ms. Ward, I used to take public transportation, and I've waited 30 minutes for a bus, one time. I can't imagine them doing it 181 times. That's not to say what's going to happen when it snows outside, when we get bad weather outside. And from coaching for 15 years, you put 250 kids outside of school, you're asking for trouble. Something's going to happen. Those kids are going to find a way to get in trouble. I just don't think it's in the best interest of the kids to have them waiting that long. Also, in the morning, you've got the high school kids arriving at 7:35 for an 8:05 bell. I just think that's too early for the kids to be getting there. I think that's a kind of a secondary problem. I just bring it up here. A suggestion that I have is to let them all ride on the same bus. I know things change as your kids kind of move through the snake of the school. And I'm sure, I don't know this, but just from my experience, that there's probably some middle school parents who said, I don't want my kids riding with those high school kids. But, we can't have it both ways, and we got to fix that problem because it's just not fair to those high school kids. It's just really not. And it's just going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and it's going to become costly with respect to having monitors. I mean, I guess another suggestion is to hire more buses and more people, but I just think that's a big expense on our honorary tax budget. So I hit my 3 minutes. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Ms. Kuchma?
Hi, good evening. Allison Kuchma, 813 Fulton Avenue. Just a couple of things this evening. Just listening to your discussion, I think you talked about just wondering if subtleties got past you. And so I just want to say I'm still concerned about the 2014-2015 budget when the superintendent asked the city for an additional $1.8 million because there were these 171 kids that were coming in, and then within a few days, a lot of those line items changed. And so in my opinion, that's not a subtlety, that's a document that you all, not all of you, but many of you were working on, and you didn't notice that the money had been moved. And I know Dr. Jones has announced that she's departing, but I do hope that before she leaves that you will ask her about that. Dr. Jones, the community still wants to know because you must have known the kids weren't coming because the money was moved before they didn't arrive. And we're still paying for those kids, and if you could answer that, and to me that's not a subtlety. I really wish that you would continue your great discussion you had today about how the board operates. I would appreciate if you'd really consider subcommittees and involving members of the community to do some of the work of the deep dive into the budget and those kinds of detail, because there's a lot of work to do. There was a special education parent survey a couple of years ago, and I don't know what happened to that, like in terms of the work, like what has been done to speak to the results that were there, and I don't see that coming to the board. John, you were the liaison. I never heard you mention that. And so it's just, there's a lot on your plate, and how do you do all that work? And I just think subcommittees would be a way to do that. And I also would like you to consider changing what has been historically the superintendent's report. I think there's a lot that could be a value add in that from what we currently have. And, I think that if you could consider some of those changes, that would be great. And I'm also concerned about, at 7 a.m., you have a meeting on Thursday. The public would like to be there. I don't know why you guys want to be there that hour in the morning. But would you consider having that kind of discussion where the public could actually attend? So anyway, that's all. Thank you all for your work. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else, whether or not you filled out a speaker slip, who'd like to talk? Seeing none, all right, we will close the public session, or public comments. All right, and move on to recognitions and reports, the gifted plan. Dr. Jones, or Ms. Seabridge.
Ms. Seabridge or Ms. High, if you would like to just give us the intro for the gifted plan.
Connected here. There we go. Well, thanks for having me back again. You're going to get tired of me after a while, I think. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about the local plan for the education of the gifted, and just have a short presentation to kind of give you just a quick snapshot of what the plan looks like, and then if you have any questions at the end, feel free to go ahead and ask away. And I think all of you will have a copy of this presentation. Ms. Goodell is going to give that to you, and there's a hyperlink to the plan in here, and I think it's also in board docs. All right, VDOE, Virginia Department of Education, they require every school division to do a technical review of their gifted education plan. So we are currently in that review period. So our plan was due, and we had to turn it in to the state in the spring. And it will go under a technical review where other school divisions will actually look at our plan, representatives from those school divisions, and they will rate the plan on a rubric. The GT Advisory Committee is tasked by the state, actually, to make sure that they review the annual local plan, and they also do revisions to that plan. So last year, we spent a lot of time working on this gifted education plan, and these are the people that were part of that committee. So you have parents, community members, you have student liaison, you have school board liaison, Michael and Kuma, and also school staff, which include all the GT specialists that we have in the division. Our plan identifies students under what we call the specific academic aptitude. So we identify kids in the areas of English and mathematics. There's certain steps that we go through for eligibility for gifted education. The first step is through screening. So we screen our kids, and what we do is we have a pool, so all of our second graders are basically screened. And at the end of the second grade year, our SIP committee, School Identification Committee, will sit down and they will look at each individual student's data to determine whether or not it actually meets the criteria to be placed and identified for gifted services. And the SIP committee, you can see on here, consists of the school-based team. It is teachers, the gifted specialists, administrators. Counselor usually is invited to be on that committee, as well as other specialists, which may include the math specialists, reading specialists, and so on. There is an appeal process as well, so if a child does not get identified for gifted education, the parents can appeal. They can appeal the decision the SIP committee made, and they have 10 instructional days to be able to do that. And then they do have the right to meet with an administrator and plead their case. We have a instructional sequence to satisfy the continuum of services for gifted education students. And I apologize, this is a little bit blurry. I'll have a better copy for you. Basically, what it's showing is that if we identify a student in the area of English, that we will provide services through the continuum through grade 12 for supporting gifted learners. So this shows our course sequence. As we can see in the elementary grades, it's enrichment and extension of English. When they get into the middle school, we offer an honors English program for students. And then in the high school, there's a multitude of different types of courses, starting with honors, IB, dual enrollment type classes that students could take. And in math, we have similar, where we have extensions and enrichment. We also have opportunity for acceleration starting in grade 3 up. In the middle school, they can opt into higher level math classes where there's 3 different math classes at each grade level, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then again, there's many different courses that they could take at the high school. We have 3 different service levels that we look at when we're identifying students, because even if they're identified gifted, even gifted students have to have differentiation. There's different levels of giftedness. So our first level is level 1. Level 1 students are students who can master that academic content with limited teacher support, but they need differentiation in addition to what they receive in that regular classroom. Level 2 students are those students who need more intense support for academic progress, a little bit more one-on-one or in-depth support from the gifted education teacher, or these may be students that are placed in those advanced accelerated classes. And then level 3, very rare group of students, but we do happen to have some that come through. We have a fairly large cohort for us right now in the elementary grades. These level 3 students are students who are way above even other gifted identified peers, and they usually are about 2 grade levels or more above. These students usually have what we call a gifted instructional plan created for them, and that plan goes through the gifted specialists and then is approved later on by administration. The identification criteria that we use must consist of multiple criteria. We cannot use 1 data point or 2 data points. We should have multiple points that we use, and you'll see what those look like here soon. They must consist of a nationally normed aptitude. So we use COGAT, and we're introducing the Naglieri this year, and also achievement tests. And those achievement tests should assess students in the areas of English and mathematics. So we're using Stanford, and we have STAR. And we also have to pay special attention to students that are economically disadvantaged, they have limited English proficiency, or a disability. So we do have nonverbal assessments that we're using for students, and we also have assessments that can be taken in Spanish. And again, I know this is blurry, so we'll make sure you have a better copy. The criteria for English is here, and it identifies level 1 and level 2 services. For the services and the criteria, we use this year starting, the Naglieri nonverbal, and that will be administered in 1st grade. The Stanford is also being used, and the Stanford will assess reading. It will also assess writing for the English identification, and we will continue to use our COGAT. STAR reading is 1 data point. In the past, it used to be 3 data points. And we will be using a benchmark, and for students that are grades 3 and above, the SOL will be used as a criteria. In the final column, you'll see there is an English characteristic rating scale. That is a teacher rating scale, so we also look at the holistic instead of the just quantitative. And the math is very much the same. The only difference is the tests are the same. It's just the way they measure, and they're measuring mathematic quantitative ability instead.
And you just want to note at the very bottom, it talks about as second graders, 6 of the 7 quantitative measures have to be met, and then 3rd through 12th, it's 7 of the 8 quantitative measures. So just information so that you know how we identify the kids.
And this information is what the SIP committee, the School Identification Committee at the schools, will take a look at all this criteria, plus the teacher rating scale and any other information they have to help make that decision. And then just kind of like introducing you a little bit to the teachers. They were going to be here tonight, but there was a back-to-school night at TJ, so we kind of missed a few, so we figured we'd just do it on our own. So Beth Green, as many of you well know, she is the K through 2 enrichment coordinator. Beth focuses mostly on enrichment program. She works with thinking skill lessons for her K-1 students, small group enrichment services that she pulls some kids out, and the fluid enrichment groups based on student needs. So kids aren't in with her all year long. It's all based on classroom observation, certain data points that she might have on them as to which group she pulls and works with. Heidi Lang has been at TJ for a while, and we have a new .5 GT specialist, thanks to the school board for that position. Laura Coates joined us as the .5. Laura does have a secondary math background, so she's perfect for helping with the accelerated math and supporting the teachers with those classes. They're working mostly with tiered delivery services. They use a variety of strategies, differentiation. Tiger Paws is used as a time to work with kids. They have pull out and push in services as well. And they also provide co-extracurricular options such as Geography B, Math Kangaroo, and so on. Anita Shu is also a new gifted specialist. She is at Mary Ellen Henderson, and she's working with grades 6 through 8. At Mary Ellen Henderson, they offer the honors, English class, advanced placement math courses at each level. And in flex enrichment time, there's certain things such as Socratic seminar, stock market, and problem-based learning offerings. Dan Coast is new as well, almost the whole team. Dan Coast is our diploma program coordinator at GM. He is working with grades 9 through 12. Dan's role is not just the IB, he also works with advanced placement courses. So he kind of handles a lot of gifted services as well because he works with the governor's school for placing students in the summer. And you can see some of the things that he supports with here. And that's it. That's all I have. So any questions?
Your last slide had these 5. Could you go back to the one just before? Do these collectively put you in the GT in high school, or any one of them puts you in the GT program, if there's any such thing?
We have open enrollment at middle and high school, so any students can opt to choose any of these courses. However, most of our already identified GT students will enroll in these courses. So there are offerings and opportunities for them, but being placed in one does not technically mean that you're identified gifted, no. Just
Okay.
because you take a class.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference in high school. There are no services, it's like there are in elementary, and so traditionally, they actually do count in your numbers for gifted, but you go so far over that, it doesn't make any difference anyway.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I did have one question, I think one of the two of you can answer. On the board docs, we didn't have this, that'll get posted, but we had the local plan for education of the gifted. So you're not going to run through that, but can you just explain how these two go together?
Well, this is based on the plan. This information is based on the plan. And just, you know, as Jeannie shared at the beginning, the plan was developed with the GT specialists, the gifted advisory parent committee, advisory committee for the school board had a lot of input, as well as Jeannie and I worked with them. And I think we actually brought the plan for approval to the school board back in, I want to say it was May. And then we used this criteria for identification for the end of the school year. So for the 16-17 school year, this is the identification we're using.
Right, and the thing on board docs is what got sent to the state.
Correct, yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, I just want to make clear, because on the one hand, this was on board docs, but you were talking to something differently, and I think that would just be confusing.
Right, now it's the same thing. The plan is actually 46 pages long, so we just condensed it. And basically, the state wants us to put in the plan, how are we screening students? How are we referring students? How are we identifying what's the criteria we're using, what are the services we're using? So that's really all of what they're asking in the plan in depth. And then we just kind of chunked it out for you and simplified it with the presentation.
Okay, and speaking of back to school, I know James, the chair, James Weatherly, has kids at
Yes.
TJ, so
Yes.
saw him heading there as I was heading here, so that's why he's not here as well.
Yep.
Okay, anyone else? No? Okay,
Thank you.
great, thank you. All right, now we move into our closed meeting. Could I get someone to move us into closed, please?
Mr. Chair, pursuant to Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move the board convene a closed meeting for the following purposes: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter personnel under Section 2.2-3711A. One in particular, staff appointments, staff reassignments, staff resignations, staff retirements, staff performance, EPAD assignments, and advisory committee appointments and resignations. In legal matters under Section 2.2-3711A7, in particular, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of law advice by such counsel, in particular the Mount Daniel Project.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Mr. Kimball.
Mr. Ankuma,
Aye.
Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Reitinger. Yes. Ms. Ward. Mr. Webb.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, Dr. Jones, how long do you think this will take?
10 minutes at the most.
Okay, thank you. Okay, could someone move us back into open session, please?
All right, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well, before certifying. All right, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Or opposed? No? Okay, could someone certify the closed?
All right, Mr. Chair, whereas the Falls Church Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711 subsection B of the Code of Virginia requires the certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Gill. All right, Hunter.
Mr. Ankuma,
Yes, sir.
is that an aye?
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Gill.
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Reitinger. Yes. Ms. Ward. And Mr. Webb.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. For the consent agenda, I ask unanimous consent that it be approved. Seeing no objection, it's approved. All right, moving on to 8.01, final draft work plan and final draft triennial plan. Dr. Jones?
Well, we worked again today, and I know this, I did send a note late this afternoon just on some of the updates that were sent and kind of what was included. And there is kind of a markup version. It's really hard to read just because there were so many changes, but I just wanted you to see what is reflected in there. But again, we've taken these different areas, taken all the school board input from the last, I think, 3 meetings now, and updated according to comments that people have sent. Now, there was some, I know some of you have asked about whether excellent staff, 21st century teaching and learning, what goes first, what goes second. I took this from notes I had, I want to say at the last meeting or the one before that, but one of you did ask tonight, well, could we reverse the order? Again, these are not in any sort of priority order, and I'm not sure that the board is in agreement in the way that it is now. So if that's something the board wants to discuss, please let us know. It's an easy cut and paste to reorder something. And there really, I don't think there are huge changes on the priorities from what the board has sent. A lot of it was more, I think, cleaning up language more than anything, and then making sure some aspects were a little bit clearer coming from the teacher survey components, especially on that excellent staff section. So that is actually the priorities. And when you look at the work plan, again, when some members sent some updates to the priorities, it then means you have to update the work plan because it changes the language on each one of those key action steps. We did go from 65 to 73 in the last 7 days. So we added a couple of new items on here, but I think they're doable and measurable, and I don't think they're too difficult. Well, I say that, I know, it is very robust when you, Lisa's laughing because I won't be here in the spring. But when you look at the priorities and what's in the plan, there were a couple of things that the school board had asked us to do. One of those was making sure when we were using the metric from the teacher survey that we set a target of 80%, which is pretty standard. And so we've put that in there at 80% and did say 2019. So it gives us over time. If you have something that is a lower area, it gives the staff time to get that back where it needs to be. And you can see that on the first page down the bottom, priority 1.3, where you're trying to go from 52 to 80. That's probably not going to happen in 1 year. Doesn't mean that it's not, but that's a pretty heavy goal. And a couple of the other ones that are in here are a little bit even loftier than that. And the way I tried to lay this out so it's easy is that you're actually putting the language straight from the survey, so there is no question about what survey question it is on the TEL survey, and then what that rate of agreement was this year and what you would expect it to be next year. Lisa, feel free to chime in too, because we looked at this all day today. On these different areas, there's, you have everything from your MYP to looking at kind of special populations and what we kind of want to continue to do, what we are hoping to be able to do early, like looking at things like preschool special education needs for budget implications. Somebody asked, I think it was John, at the last meeting, it just said special education, and then it was left blank. So that was filled in. And it is making sure that we're really studying pre-K, which we've already done a little bit with the board, but we need to do a little bit more, especially knowing we have 75 pre-K students this year going into the FY18 budget. And Lisa, do you have anything else that in here that you can think of that was, as we were working on this today? I'm just trying to think what else was a highlight, just so I don't read the whole thing to you again. But again, most of it you saw last week. It was cleaning up the percentages, some of the things that you wanted to add in. Probably the biggest item that I think that one of you had requested that is not in here, and certainly the board may want to discuss that, is the technology plan. And the way that it has been written over the last three weeks in here is really the way that we see the work and what we're supposed to do this year is not rewriting the entire technology plan because it is up to date. We do have a solid plan, but in the budget, it really is a budgetary issue of what do we do with the devices in the FY18 budget as far as the leasing structure and making sure that the big technology advisory is tackling that issue. Do we have the right device? What are the differences between the different devices that we piloted several years ago? Have some of the pros and cons changed as devices have changed? but not rewriting the whole thing. And I did send an email to the board late today to say, I do think it's unreasonable to ask staff to do that, especially given the staff changes that we are having. And that would be something that I think having a new superintendent next year, a new technology director is, could be a great thing to come in and look at that again. But I do think this year we're asking a little too much to do that. And I'm just saying, and then again, the community engagement side, those are all outlined. We've updated several of those dates again, according to what the school board had wanted us to do last week. I did try to put some markers in here on like page 7, priority 4.1, to establish an internet security and safety risk mitigation plan. I like that Mr. Reidiger had changed the language a little bit there, and I think it is very clear. The one thing I did put as an asterisk down at the bottom is that any additional programming or planning beyond the network assessment report is reliant upon additional tasks which are fully funded. So it's not that I don't think anybody would say we're happy to probe more or do more, but we may need to look at, does that mean we need to contract more, which we had talked about as a school board. And there's another one of those in here, Lisa. I don't know if you remember where it was too.
Priority 1.3.
Oh, it's professional development. Is
Yeah.
that on 1.3?
It's on page 3, the top of page 3.
Yeah, so we had a couple of additions where we wanted to make sure, well, we've taken what a school board member may have suggested and put that in here, but we didn't get rid of the one that was already there because we felt like it still had value and it was something that the principals had discussed. Is it 1.3, Lisa? Yeah.
It's under, as priority 1.3 and
Right.
priority 1.4, and it was just sufficient resources and differentiation of professional development. They are very different things. When you talk about differentiated, you're talking about making sure that it meets the needs of the teacher. For example, a social studies teacher is not going to need the same thing that your PE teacher is going to need. So making sure that we differentiate it so they're not sitting in things that are not relevant to their professional field. And then the sufficient resources that's in here is to make sure for us to be able to have funding to be able to send people, as the budget just now, this past budget, professional development was cut. And so in order for us to, possibly get this rating higher, we need to have more funding to go along with that to make sure it's sufficient and to create some plans with our administrators and teachers on what sufficient really means.
Mr. Nkema?
Can I ask a question about this professional development? I mean, clearly it's required, but we also have to be realistic in that it is subject to what funding. So is it possible for some compromises, I guess is what I'm looking for, but is it possible to have, and I'm not sure what options are available now, but I was thinking about it wondering, can we have options that satisfy, and there's the differentiation is required, but if we had a few options, because when you recommend that the different courses or different content or different disciplines require different, I agree with that. The only problem is, where do we draw the line? Because it's a budgetary issue. If you know, I'm not sure I'm articulating this right, but I'm concerned about putting this in when we well know that budgets are tight and there's only so much we can do within the budget. I mean, how many options can we provide teachers generally? It may not be to California, but what if we go to Maryland or Delaware or?
Well, I think that's really what we do now. I mean, we bring as much as we can in-house, and when Lisa and I talked about this again a lot today, and the question is, sufficient resources are available for professional development in my school. What is sufficient? If you send a teacher, out of state to a conference, you need to budget about $3,000. So if you add $30,000 into the budget, you've helped 10 people, and we have well over, 200 and some odd staff. So you're not going to get a better rating on this. And so when we've looked at this, it was really making sure we do mobilize more people out to Washington, D.C., to some of those areas that are getting them to conferences more. That $40,000 could make a little bit of a difference there. That's reasonable. But that's why you see in here on the top of page 3, to increase the professional development support by no less than $40,000 in the FY18 budget in order to meet this priority. If the budget is not increased, the priority is not attainable. Now, that's, I mean, if we've already cut our budget and we don't put more resources into it, the teachers aren't going to feel that there are more opportunities, because we have to train on certain things. I mean, we cannot also have in a work plan that we're going to be an international baccalaureate school and then just say, oh, well, let's not train on PYP, MYP, international baccalaureate. We're committed to quite a few things like that.
And that was what I was going to speak about. You know, as far as our priority for professional development funds, we start out with certain amounts of monies, and we've communicated it to the principals, the programs for MYP, PYP, and DP, and that takes about a little over 50% of the PD budget. And then from there, we've looked at other areas that we're focusing on this year. For example, Jan Richardson's coming in. You know, guided math was something that we're doing through the gifted plan, as well as a focus for Thomas Jefferson this year. So we want to have opportunities to have professional development on that. One of the other things we've looked at is, are there things that are offered by the Virginia Department of Ed for the different disciplines? For example, the Social Studies Department reached out. There's something that's right here in DC. Yes, there's a cost, but I commit to things like that quicker than I will to a trip to Boston or somewhere like that. I want to go to a literacy collaborative, which is great. It's a great experience, but it is more expensive, and we're trying to really, focus on the areas that, as a division, we need to focus on, which is the MYP right now, and then we will use, the remaining funding for other things for teachers to go to. And we ask the teachers to go to the principals first. If the principal feels that it's something that they really believe that the teachers should go do, they usually reach out to me, and if the principal feels really strongly, if we can do it and there's funding, we do it.
And I think on Mr. Ankuma's question, the differentiation aspect is, we hear it all the time. I mean, that's a big issue for teachers. They really want differentiated professional development. It's sometimes hard to do when it's something like MYP or PYP, because they're all working on one collective topic. But the one that the principals had selected was under the 1.4, and that's why we want to make sure it stays in here, was to collect staff feedback input forms for all of the professional development, with the goal of reaching agreement that the results are communicated to teachers and evaluated. What is working? So if we are going to have 8 different professional development workshops and teachers are saying, oh, I felt like this was differentiated, and then at the end of the year on an overall question, you get, we don't have enough differentiation, but you go back and look at, well, gosh, out of those 20 workshops, they all said we had great differentiation. So where's the disconnect? And so it's making sure they're getting the ongoing feedback, and that's something the principals all have in their goals. The other thing that's in here that, as a matter of fact, we were dealing with this issue today that we feel like needs to stay in here, but we've worded it, I feel like, a little bit better than it was last week, and that is provide regularly scheduled unencumbered plan time for teachers. That is a huge issue. We can't increase plan time, but where we're having a communication issue is what is actually unencumbered. And so we're asking our principals to report on the method, the quantity, and the structure in which their buildings are providing unencumbered plan. And what that means is if a teacher has 400 minutes, they know that 250 of that every week is their time. The other portion is actually when they will have an RTI meeting, or they'll have a PYP meeting, or a team meeting, but they know exactly what's unencumbered. And that's been really an elementary issue for us, and that's been a challenge. So that's something we're all working on, and we were working on it today. Michael, Mr. Kim.
Help me reconcile the word unencumbered with method, quantity, and structure.
Okay. Well, first of all, unencumbered means it's your time. So if I want to go and just put stickers and decorate my room, I can do that. If I want to go and meet with the media specialist because I'm planning a unit and I need some help from her, I can do that. So what the method means and the quantity is, okay, what is the amount? If the teacher has 400 minutes, how much can they count on every week? Not, okay, this week we're going to have 15 meetings so you don't get any, and next week we're going to have no meetings and you get all 400. What can a teacher know that every single week is unencumbered so that they can plan on that? That's the quantity. When you're talking about the method, How do you use early release, for instance? That's a big one. In high school and middle school, they know it's almost all professional development. That's where they really have their time, and especially now that they're coordinated. But at the elementary, does that mean that on Wednesday afternoons, it is unencumbered and they can do whatever they want, but all of their meetings are going to take place like on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And they know every Tuesday and Thursday, those are their meeting times. So that's what it means by the method, but it's not erratic where every week a teacher doesn't know what they have or when they have it. And again, it's really more of an elementary issue.
All right, so the method, quantity, and structure is not referring to what the teacher does with their time,
No.
but okay, that's what I
Not
mean.
unless it's encumbered. And if it's encumbered, then it may be, okay, this is your PYP time or MYP time. So other than that, which is normal, you have to have some collaborative time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when it's their time, it's their time. And I'm just seeing if there's anything else. Sorry.
Actually, one question on that. So what would be the target in terms of percentage for unencumbered time each week? Because it's one thing to say you've got it, but if you don't have enough of it, it doesn't really help.
Well, I think that's a discussion with our principals that they are working on. I know that, their principals are working on that right now. That's the conversation that we're having at our leadership team tomorrow. But I think from our, what I've heard from teachers is they want to know, give me a schedule for a good part of the year so that I know on Wednesdays, whether it's an hour or whatever. So, if you talk to other school divisions, 250 minutes is the minimum. I do believe in Falls Church it's going to be more than that of unencumbered time. Right now, it depends on the school. It's right around anywhere from 300 to 400 minutes of plan time right now. And as I shared at our last meeting, is just really, working with principals to share with teachers when they have meetings so that they are prepared and aren't at the last minute saying, I've got to get coverage or I had scheduled something else. So working with principals to actually create a schedule for the teachers and share that at least 2 or 3 months out so that, they can plan as well.
Could Peak play a role in, in a few months collecting input as to how it's actually worked? Because when I first hear unencumbered, what I think is you're told it's unencumbered, but then there are all these things you end up having to do anyway, so it's less unencumbered than it really
That's
seems
part
to
of
be.
being a
And that does
teacher.
happen.
I mean,
It's part
yeah.
of being a human.
It's
but-
education.
I mean, that's
Here-
education.
Yeah.
So if you're going to choose to do your grades on a Thursday night while you're watching The Bachelor, which is what
It
I
comes
would
on Monday
do,
night.
then,
Bachelor's Monday night.
well, or you're going to choose to take your plan time and put your grades in during that time. And that's one of those kind of personal management that you get to decide how you do that. And some people can put their grades in 20 minutes and some it's an hour just because they either, they're just slower at learning the program because they're a newer teacher or they don't give as many grades.
And John,
So,
I would think that would be something that we would want to leave at our building level principals, administrators, working with their teachers in their individual buildings, just because at Mount Daniel or TJ or MEH, there may be different needs. And when Peak comes together, they're coming together as a group and talking as a whole teacher group, and the needs are different depending on the level. So I would be a little leery of Peak deciding how many minutes of unencumbered time without the input and working with their principals.
Well, no, definitely work with the principals, but it's more, this sounds great. How do we tell if it actually worked?
Having our principals come report, and we share that out with the board, what the schedule looks like and how much time, that has been committed.
Okay, yeah, because I'd like to know, what they're told, and then I would like to hear how did it work? Because, setting up a great plan that in reality doesn't really work doesn't do us much good, and nobody,
And
frankly,
even
wants to
though
do
it'll
that.
come out through the TEL survey, if that's done again this year, you want to hear it earlier, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, the earlier, you have more opportunities to actually fix it, as opposed to saying, well, we just wasted a year and that really didn't work, so let's try something else.
And we can definitely we have our first Peak meeting on September 20th, so definitely we can have that conversation with Peak and then ask them to go back and have that conversation with their colleagues in conjunction with their administrators. I mean, I think definitely Peak needs to, to weigh in on some
Right, and you
some
can't
part.
combine everything and say this is what everybody thinks, because it is going to be by school and by grade and by level, and it's going to differ. But yeah, I would just like to know that we're going to get feedback at some point.
The other thing I'll point out on excellent staff is that priority 1.1, which is really helping the kind of principals and leaders be engaged in visiting classrooms and instruction. That is a budgetary item because it is trying to get that last special education administrator, which would be at Mount Daniel. We put that in over the last, we've had a 4-year strategy to help principals with that. This is our last building. And then at Jesse Thackeray, especially with 75 students, they desperately need an office assistant, and quite frankly, they really need it today. Securitas really helped when we made that adjustment last year, but with the number of little kiddos, it's really too much for, Liz oversees the program, Rachel's on site, but it's just too much. And we may be coming to the board and letting you know we've made an adjustment if we're able to do that between now and, winter break, but that's something that's in here just because it's a huge need with the number of children. And then class size is in here, and we've stayed the course on this work plan for class size. So that's obviously a big decision for the school board when you start looking at next year's budget, and is that something that the school board wants to stay the course on? Or are you looking at lifting that class size number? So, and everything I've heard is that you want to stay the course, so we kept it that way in here.
Okay. Any comments, questions on the work plan? Phil?
So this is actually more on the priorities than the work plan. I will say that generally, my view is that we ought not approve the work plan, not because the work plan is bad, but because I think that's too detailed for us. I think we've often had discussions about letting the superintendent and the administration govern, and I think what the work plan says ought to be, we can advise and assist the administration on what it says, but the goals that we ought to pay attention to ought to be in the school board priorities. So it would be my intent to abstain from any vote on the work plan. There's some stuff in there I disagree with, like it strikes me that the goal of 17% for teacher turnover is not appropriate given what our school size is. The stats that I've seen are that for schools in our range on free and reduced lunch percentages, it's more like 13% nationwide as opposed to 16%. And I haven't seen 17%, although I haven't looked at what's been done. My concerns with the priorities document remain sort of the 4 that I called out before. One, on the excellent staff part, I'd actually like to see numeric targets put into the priorities document. Not that they would be different from the work plan. In fact, some of them would be 85, some might be 80, some might be 70, and maybe that's 2019 or 2018. But I think when we have generic statements about good things we want to do in the priorities document, and then all the details are in the work plan, the school board loses focus on the big things that we want to get done. So I think we ought to pick the top ones. For example, differentiated professional education, adequate degree of planning time, and we ought to say what we want to achieve in a time frame that we think is reasonable, and we ought to put that in the work plan. The second is the technology audit. The technology work, staff, the instructional technology plan. Sorry, I got to get the term right. I hear that we don't want to rewrite the whole darn thing, even though I think it's 4 years old at this point. And I'm not even suggesting that. I just suggested that we revise it. And I'm unlimited to say that examination ought to be limited to whether we renew the Apple lease or go with other devices. I think the school board gets involved in lots of other plans. The gifted education plan that we got presented to tonight, all of the reports, like the approval of the special education plan and those sorts of things. I don't think, at least in my experience, I haven't seen the details of the instructional technology plan come to the board, and as we're deciding what devices we want to use, I think that ought to be looked at in the board, and that ought to be a major item of work for the fall. Not again suggesting that we revise the whole thing, but we look at what it is and what its elements are. And the most important thing to me, as this might sound like a broken record, but is the success metrics, which used to say 12 success metrics and now may just say key metrics because it's actually 11 and not 12, is That's the biggest thing I want to look at, because I've read through that in all the different documents, and maybe one of them is actually a metric, but it doesn't give you an independent basis to judge whether the technology is being successful in better educating students. They're all, to the best of my recollection, around the extent to which we deploy technology and train people on technology, which I would call output as opposed to outcome metrics. Or it does say, help us achieve educational outcomes, but there's no way to determine whether technology is a causal link to that at all. It's just we want to achieve those kinds of outcomes. The third thing is I do think we should work on putting together a success scorecard. And again, it's very much with what I said about the first part. We get this great deck right around sort of towards the end of the year from Ms. Seabridge and other folks about all the different things that we're doing. And maybe I'm not as bright as a lot of other people, but it's very hard to go through and say, yeah, but what does all that mean? Are we succeeding or failing? What I'd like to see is an effort that breaks down, and this is not necessarily enhanced or different, but says, here are the spectrum of things we look at, like the state requirements and class sizes. It's just sort of, what amounts to a one-page traffic light chart that could give us the red, greens, and yellows so that we know where we want to work towards. And I know that's a hard thing to do, but it's something that I think I've tried to do, to have a scorecard in all of my management roles. The last thing is on community engagement. This I'm less committed to. I'm very committed to community engagement, but I think it would be the right thing to do to say, how are we going to measure community engagement? What are we going to do? Not we're going to have 3 articles in the Falls Church News Press each year, or 5 of us are going to blog, but what do we want to achieve with more outreach, and how do we measure that? And let's put that in. Since we don't have that yet, what I suggested is that one of the items of work for this year to be put in the priorities is to come up with a plan for how we're going to measure that. So we don't have to continually reinvent the wheel and say, if people are satisfied or unsatisfied, that we decide how we're going to measure it. So those are the 4 biggest items. I would like to thank Dr. Jones, given that I just sent my most recent set of comments in this morning, for working so hard to incorporate many of them, and I greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else before? I've got one question. The document that's marked up, as opposed to the one that is not marked up.
Right.
The non-marked up one is supposed to have all the changes from the other one because they're different. And I'm trying to figure out whether I'm just looking at different things. For example, under excellent staff, the marked up one says on bullet 4, provide sufficient professional development opportunities for each school. But the 4th one on the other one says provide sufficient resources for professional development at each school. So
The one that is the clean copy was taking what, a couple of school board members sent, the comments, the notes we took from the last meeting, and then trying to get a clean copy and adding a couple of the new items in that were suggested. Because we did go from, what did I say, 65 to 73. And most of those actually, I think, are in the 21st century teaching and learning. Is that correct, Lisa? I think so. I think it was, yeah, that's the longest section.
okay, anyone else?
I will say, I'm going to give my impassioned plea here, though, because I won't be here, but I do think it's really, this work plan has been probably in my 25 years, and this was not my structure. This was a school board structure. It was different in 2011 when I started here. It was different again, a little bit different in 2012. But I can say, honestly, this is the first time in a school division where we have really, I feel like I've actually known what's really in a work plan, where we all know what we need to do, and what really were the priorities of the school board. And so, and we've all been through big visioning sessions where you have documents that are 4 inches thick by the time you're done and nobody looks at them, and it has a lot of mumbo jumbo in it. So I would encourage the school board to, as you go forward, to try to have a practical work plan, because it does make a difference for those of us that are kind of in the trenches doing the work. And I know for me, I literally mark stuff off all year long, and it's really valuable. And that the other thing I would say is that we've tried really hard to say children should not be a metric. And when I say that, I am one of the biggest data people in that it should be focused on growth. And if you look at most work plans across the country, they will say all ESOL students need to be at 80%. That's ridiculous. It is not a target that is doable. And what happens is you end up with frustrated staff who feel like they're failures because they can't meet the target. And in this work plan, we have, this is I think the third or fourth year, our target has been 1 full year's growth for every child. We can do that. And for children at risk, it's 1.5. And sometimes we can't do that. But they're they're targeted on student growth. They're not targeted on some arbitrary number. So I would just encourage the school board to keep that in mind, because it is really easy to go and start picking numbers and thinking and forgetting that we're dealing with children, the human side of education, because it's happening around the country, and it hasn't happened here, and I would hate to see that. Just, it's one thing this district's done really well. So.
All right, to one other thing that Phil said about not approving the work plan, I mean, they are so closely tied. I mean, the work plan is how the priorities get implemented. So I'd be open to suggestions. Well, first of all, is there any reason we need to vote to approve it, other than we've always done it? Is there any legal reason? I mean, doing these documents, it's our choice, right?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, the only reason it was good for me, I knew you meant business, I was supposed to get it done. So, if it's something that the staff have put together, then basically what I'm hearing the school board say is you don't really care about how we accomplish that. So something like Mr. Ridiger, who you're passionate about the technology plan, for instance, that means we can do whatever we want. And so as long as the school board's comfortable with that, because I really have used this, as kind of the guiding tool, and I knew when we talked about the work plan that that's what you expected me to do. And it's been helpful for me. So you don't have to approve it. I mean, you don't have to approve even your priorities. I think it's been something the board has done to give us a clear message as staff, but you don't have to do that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if these are the priorities we really want, and this is how they're going to get done, I think it's incumbent on us to say this is how we expect it to get done. So.
Well, and I would say too, as a superintendent, the other thing is, then don't evaluate me as a superintendent on something you didn't give me clear direction on. So, and technology would be probably one of those great things where over the last 5 years, I knew what the board expected me to do as far as, okay, no wireless and 35 laptops is not where we expect you to be in 3 years from now. And so having that kind of expectation of me I liked it because I knew what I was supposed to do. So if you're going to loosen that up, just know that then you also have to live with the result that you get. That is the work that an individual sitting in this chair decided was the best work to do.
Okay, anyone else have any comments on that? I mean, generally, I think we all as a board got what we wanted, even though not everybody got what they individually wanted. The one thing I do want to raise that I raised in my email earlier today is, all right, let's be honest, we're now saying what is near the top is more important. I mean, we never did that before, but we've had enough discussion that it's clear that, at least to us, it seems to me that if it's at the top, it's more important than stuff that's down at the bottom, which is kind of ironic because I think responsible fiscal management is down at the bottom. But if we are going to go that route, I very much want to put 21st century teaching and learning in small classes at the top, because that's basically the kids, and the kids should be at the top if we are going to go that route. Otherwise, I would say go back, and I can't even remember what the order was before, but if we're going to say something is our first priority, it should be the kids, not the staff. So.
Can I say something?
Comments? Yeah, that's why you're here.
Does it matter? Does it matter what we put up, first or seventh? Because I personally assign equal importance to all of them, subject to funding.
Do you want to put a header up there that says in no priority order or something, or? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, honestly, I'd be in favor of that because I don't think anyone trumps the other. But that's where we have, or at least with whatever city council gives us, we have the ability or where the implied authority to prioritize and maybe allocate a little bit more to one or the other based on our needs. But I wouldn't prioritize secure schools over small classes or readiness over community engagement, or, you know what I mean?
No, I agree, but the discussion that we've had, I mean, staff got moved to the top, and that was not there before because people here said they thought staff should go to the top because it was the most important for the community. So we've raised that discussion already, is my point. So if we've raised the discussion, where do we want to go with it?
Can we put it in a circle?
I would make the suggestion that maybe we have a cover page, that it's a circle, and in the middle is FCCPS and school board, and there's 8, whatever, however many priorities or spokes, and you put them all around there, and it's so that's like, these are all of our priorities, and they're all equal, and they're all things stemming out from us, and the next page is, and here's the detail behind it.
Well,
It's just a visual representation that shows people like these are all equal priorities, and I don't think it would take, I could whip it up pretty quickly in a PowerPoint slide. I don't think it would take long to do, and it's just it's a nice way to be like, oh, everything is equal, and then the next page is like, we could list them in alphabetical order on the next page.
yeah, well, don't we
Yeah, I
have
mean-
a diagram like that on the website now?
We used to call them pillars, and we had a circle in the middle, and they went out. That was probably 3 years ago, so we can go back to that. Mr. Brett is really good at those. He's very talented at those things.
Okay, anyone else? Michael, Margaret, Lawrence? Okay. Any more thoughts or discussion about whether or not to vote on the work plan? I mean, I think, well, obviously I made myself clear. I think we need to, if this is what we want to get done this year, we need to make it real clear to staff, because otherwise it's not fair. It's saying, well, we have these priorities, but you kind of figure it out, and then at the end, what do we do if they don't do a good job? They don't have anything to measure themselves against. So, nothing?
I guess I'm for sending the stuff out with measurable and other targets, if so to speak. But does that mean we take into consideration Mr. Reitinger's comments and make some adjustments to what's in there? How do we want to play that? I mean, that would be my suggestion. I mean, Mr. Reitinger, is there something we could do to this plan that would make you comfortable sending the stuff out, or sending this out as a target for staff?
No, if I could just respond, my point is not that we don't have specific measurable targets where they're possible, and don't have specific measurable targets where they're not possible, but that we ought to put, where there are targets that we're going to manage, we ought to put them in the priorities document and not the work plan. And that if it's not in the priorities document, then I think it's appropriate, with the advice and assistance from the school board, that the superintendent and the administration decide how to execute that. So I mean, that's why I didn't want to have something like, I know this language has been changed, but that we do a better job of explaining to teachers how much planning time they had. I don't think that's what you want to do. That may be a means to do it if you think that's the big problem. I don't think it is. I think what we want to achieve is that our teachers believe they've got sufficient planning time. And so that's what I want to put in the priorities document, and then we can work with the superintendent and work with the administration and hold both ourselves and the superintendent accountable about whether we achieve that or not. But I don't want to always look to the work plan document to see specifically what we're trying to achieve. We ought to, as a school board, be able to say in a one-page document what we really care about. Because when we're looking at 7 pages instead of 1 page, then it's a lot harder to focus on the things that you really care about. And despite the 2 times we've had the superintendent present on, I think there's a lot of language in the work plan that we really haven't gone through. As I suggested, I think 17% turnover is an improper target. I think we ought to shoot for something lower than that. But if it's a big enough deal that we are, as a school board, want to be able to say we're doing this or we're not doing this, given the limited amount of time that we've got, I'd try to put it all into the work plan document. And I understand if the rest of the board doesn't want to, but it feels to me like trying to micromanage 7 pages of objectives as opposed to a 1-page priorities document is not the right approach. So I'm not saying that I disagree with the work plan. I'm just saying that I think the things that we want to do and we want to focus on ought to be in the priorities document.
And I'm asking just because I really am trying to understand. So how does putting an 80% behind one of these statements make it more important than the things that don't have an 80%? Because that's really, because when I was trying to approach this and we were trying to look at not just your comments, but different ones, I did back out like where it said, 53 to go to 80% from the survey result, that number, and put that quantifiable piece in the work plan. So it's still there in what you asked me to do. But I didn't leave it on here just simply because to me these were just kind of the overarching priorities. So if you put in 80%, how does that make it more important?
It's not that it makes it more important. It says this is what we're aiming for. It says that we, as the school board, are not going to look at 3 or 4 different things that add up to this. It says we are going to work to manage to this goal. And I recognize that some of those cannot be analytical, but some of them can be. And deadlines and clear goals focus mind and effort, in my experience, more than general statements do.
And I think we're saying the same thing, honestly. I'm just saying from sitting where I am, I love the work plan, and there's a lot in there, but each one of these categories, it is so detailed, I know exactly what we need to do, and I literally can mark it off. And to me, that's what really helps us, is to take one of these statements and try to break it apart. So, I just share that from where I'm sitting. Having a statement trying to keep it on one page and having a statement is really difficult. And as a matter of fact, we were looking today at the very first one that I had when I started in Falls Church, and it just happened to be the chair at the time, and he loved brain maps. And it was all over the place, and it was hard for me to understand what to do. But the work plan, I think, has been so helpful for us as a school division because it's taking what the school board has said is really important, and then we're breaking that apart. And sometimes it's, 5 things, sometimes it's 7, but it's so well defined, it makes it happen. And I think there are very few things that have been on our work plan in the last few years that we haven't been able to make happen on what the school board wants to do because it was so well defined for us. And so, I share that because I think it's important.
So again, just in quick response, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think going through each and every line of the work plan and ensuring that we have consensus on each element of a 7-page document would take more time than the board is willing to commit to that process. And I think towards our last meeting, where Ms. Gill, sitting next to me this time, not at that time, tries to do a deeper discussion, and we rapidly move through with the chair at the time saying, we've only been through, I recall, something like, we've got an hour set aside for this, and, we've spent a half an hour on the first item. I actually think going through and discussing each of the items in the work plan, I'd be happy to do that if the board wants to devote the time to going through each of those work plan items. But we started the process relatively late, and I don't know how much time we're going to have this year to go through all of that. It feels to me like having unmeasurable goals in the document that people have paid sufficient attention to, and lots of different goals that are subsidiary metric goals in a larger document that has not been I mean, I'm sure a huge amount of staff work went into it, but we haven't gone through. We're sort of, as a board, then signing up to a bunch of things that we may not fully understand. And I would probably, if we're going to do that, go through each item and say, no, that ought not be 17, that ought to be 13, or something like that. And I don't think the board has the appetite to set aside a significant review for that. So my suggestion remains to have some numeric targets where possible in the priorities document, at least in the excellent staff part, to develop the scorecard and to proceed, as I suggested, with the technology work plan and the developing metrics for community engagement. And I do just want to say one final thing, and I don't want to prolong our discussions. I as a significant opponent of the degree to which standardized tests are used, I agree with everything the superintendent said about not being able to measure every part of education. But, if the 1 year, 1.5 year goal is so important, then let's put that in the priorities document as the very first item under 21st century learning and education, because that's what we care about. And then we don't have to specify out what all of that means, but we can, that's something you can measure. Did we have did we have a year of progress or a year and a half of progress for the 2 different classes you identified? That's kind of where I'd like to be, and not measure things that are not strictly measurable, like, IB, K to 12. That's kind of a binary goal, but it's not really measurable. But we do it because we think it's the right thing to do. That has a lot of other elements, and I agree very much with that. So, I don't think we're in different places about where we want to be, but we are in different places about how to describe getting there. And so I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to just be quiet at this point.
Okay, well, actually, one question for you. At one point you said, basically, people are going to be looking at the priorities document, not so much the work plan. And so you wanted measurable numbers in the priorities so that people would know they were there. Is it also a communications issue where we need to let more people know that the work plan exists and that there are things in there that they should be looking at that are more specific? I mean, it's also a question of people aren't looking at the other document because they're not necessarily seeing the other document because we're not publicizing it enough and explaining what it is and how that is actually how the rubber meets the road, as opposed to the priorities, which say, go forward, do these things, and the work plan is how you do it. Is that part of the problem?
I'm actually thinking less about the public and more about board members, because I just think it's easier to work with a one-page list of things you're trying to achieve than a 7-page list of items to accomplish. But certainly, I think there are people in the community that would be well-served to know more about all of the different, more measurable things that are in the work plan that back up the priorities document.
Okay. Any more discussion about priorities versus work plan?
So, Mr. Chair, this sounds to me like, and this is, again, a suggestion, would a little bit more time to I don't know if the word is condense the work plan into the priorities document be helpful?
Well, I think the problem, they're 2 very, very different things. I mean, the priorities is the 50,000-foot level, where do we need to go? And the work plan is, okay, how do you get there? What vehicle do you use? When do you leave? What road do you take? And I don't think they can be combined.
No, I'm not sensing a combination as much as one is a what and the other is a how. Mr. Ridinger, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sensing from my understanding of what you're proposing or recommending is that we have some specificity in the priorities document, but then the work plan becomes how that is sort of implemented. So I see the 2 as I see one as a summary, and the other one as a more detailed explanation of it and how it gets worked out. Not so much that the two are different. They should be the same. They should say the same thing, really, but one should be more of a summary and one should be more detailed. Am I on the right path?
I think that's right.
I think, but the real question is, Michael, are you asking if there were more numbers to measure in the priority work plan, would Phil then be willing to support doing both? And I guess I hear what you're saying is more a fundamental framing question, which I don't think we can fix here tonight.
Which is what I'm asking, with a little bit more time, are we under the gun to do something today?
This
On
is
this
the work
document?
plan
Can I
for
just
the
say, we are in
school
the
year.
second week of school.
Yeah.
I mean, and so knowing the work for the year is important, and we have some deadlines in here that are like October, November. I mean, now, certainly from what you sent today, if we're talking about taking the 80% and putting that back on here, I can do that tomorrow, send it back out, and we'll be done. If you're talking about totally rewriting the whole thing, that's a whole different ballgame. So, I mean, from the first version that we saw, it really is just taking the metrics in here and sticking them on the other page. And if that's what the school board wants me to do, I'll work on that tomorrow, and we'll get it back out and be done.
Well, I think the real question is, if it's just a few things, we can amend it here if people agree to it. But I really think we don't have the priorities of the work plan for this year, and we're in the second week of school. So I think we should be doing everything except saying, do we have more time?
I'm less worried about the timing, and I understand that the superintendent has to get some things done. But are we trying to do a good job, or are we just trying to get it through the system?
Well, or are we trying to do a perfect job and dragging it out for that? I mean, that's the enemy.
And I'm going to add that I am not going to be here for the rest of the year to do the work. What I'm trying to do is actually put a work plan in place that I really do think that it's going to be helpful for staff, helpful for an interim superintendent who is going to be taking on an enormous amount of projects. And, the clearer we can be about what do you want somebody to do, at least for this year. It doesn't mean when you hire a new superintendent, most school districts go through a whole visioning. I mean, you kind of look at things with a new lens, and doing that, at the end of the year when you've hired the new superintendent could be great going into next year and really look at it from a different framework. But I do think to not have kind of this work where people know what you want, what you want to be done, we're talking about a pretty short time frame. And I really do want to provide for the school board, something so that staff will know what you want us to do. And for me, I mean, I told you I am committed here until the day that I leave, and we have a lot of things that are due just in October and November that I want to be sure we get done, so.
Yeah, and I think if the numbers are in the work plan and we pass the work plan, we've made it clear that we expect those numbers to be met. So I see it's more a framing issue if we put more numbers in the priorities, and I think if we want to look at that for next year, and definitely start the process a whole lot earlier than we did this year.
And that's actually the work plan.
And that's, okay, and that's in the work plan.
Can we pass one and not the other?
What would be the point of
I'm saying, can we pass one with a modification to the other subsequently?
I mean, honestly, we can go back and amend, but it would seem odd to say, these are our priorities, but we're not going to approve how they're done, or this is how you do the things we haven't passed. I think they need to go together, or it would seem rather odd.
Do you want me to update it for next week? I'm happy to add those metrics on this page that were in there, put them back on, and you can look at it again. I'll send it back out. You can then vote on it next week if that's better.
Well, I mean, what were the metrics? It didn't sound like there were many.
It was pretty much the survey stuff that, I mean, for the most part, it's going from like the 50% to 80%. It's just calling that out. And I can look and see what's in here and which ones you can put a metric to, and I'm happy to do that.
Phil?
I mean,
Would a week's grace and a little more effort help?
Look, I do not want to be the one to counsel kicking the can down the road, because I am renowned for my impatience with kicking the can down the road. I'm happy to sit here and do line in, line outs tonight if you guys want to do that. Or I'm happy to proceed as the superintendent does. And I'm not going to be I'm not going to be a troublemaker if you decide not to put the numbers in the priorities. I think it's better. Right now, it's not a priorities document that I think is where it ought to be, and so I wouldn't vote for it. But that doesn't mean I don't think it gets to the substance of where we want to go. So I think it's really a question of what the board wants to do. I said the 4 points I raised are the 4 things that concern me. Probably the numbers are one of the most important ones, but the other ones are valuable to me too. I'm happy to go with however the board wants to go, and if it's more important to put this behind us, then I will work in good spirit that the board wants and use the numbers from the work plan as the parts of the scorecard that I think really matter the most. But my preference certainly would be to have more measurable targets in the priorities document, as I said initially.
Okay, but if we had that, you would still feel the need to go through the work plan line by line, right? I mean, it seems like, well, first of all, saying having more would be needed, so it goes against your quantifiable. I mean, what is that? 2 more, 3 more, 4 more? I mean, I think partly what Michael's trying to get to is, can we get you to the point where you would be willing to vote for both of them? Or is it more a question of, we're close?
If the right things are in the priorities document, even though I don't think we spent sufficient time on the work plan, I'd vote yes for both of them. I'd certainly be willing to do that.
Okay, but that would need to be the 4 things you mentioned. I mean, I'm really at the point where I think we've kicked it down the road too far, and we're trying to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I think we should pass both tonight, because I think it's clear what we expect in the work plan, whether or not there's a number in the priorities. I mean, I don't see a lack of clarity or a conflict between the two. And I think what we should be doing is giving staff clear guidance.
So I would suggest the following. If some measurable numbers along the lines that we've discussed before get put into the priorities document, and the language around the technology plan is adjusted not to reflect that there'll be a complete rewriting of the plan, but there'll be a revision done in the year with school board input. It's a priority to revise the plan this year. Then I would consider my concerns satisfied.
Okay.
And I'll deal with the rest of the stuff next round.
Well, could you, while we're doing other things, work up some language?
I mean, the language is what I provided before. I'm happy to respond to any changes, but the language, I think the superintendent knows some of the targets, and I'm less concerned about getting all 4. I think we talked about 4 different ones in there, but I suggested, I think, 3 the last time. The language I suggested for the 21st century part was revise the technology plan to coincide with budget discussions for FY18. The big point is I don't want it limited to a review of current device structure and academic needs of each building, because I don't think the only question we're looking at is whether it's Chromebooks or iPads. Excuse me, Chromebooks or MacBooks. So I just would like the language looser in that regard, while doing a device structure review is a key part of that.
Yeah, and with all due respect, I mean, I'm going to say what I sent out to the board today. I think it's unreasonable. I think what you're, and I will say that, and from the person who's there looking out at the staff that we have, where we're going to have an interim superintendent, and generally interim superintendents, 99.9% of them are retired superintendents. They have not led school divisions through technology integration and don't understand technology, most of them. And that's just in their day and age, they were focused on other things. And, on top of that, we know that our technology director is retiring. And that was, on the agenda tonight as of December. And that's a huge ask. Even if we find a rock star for somebody to come in to a division that is operating at one of the highest levels in the country on technology integration, and we are, and our teachers will tell you that every time they go to these workshops and conferences, for that person to come in and then try to be rewriting a plan. And I understand what you're saying, and I think that there may be a need to do that, but looking towards the future and being a little bit patient by 6 or 8 months, it could make a really big difference to staff to really be able to do it well if you're wanting to rewrite it. The actual plan is at the state. There really isn't a reason to rewrite a technology plan, and the school board shouldn't be writing it. I mean, truthfully, it should be the staff. That has to come from teachers and people that are out in the classrooms. And what is it that they really believe, is 21st century instruction? And it isn't about the tool. It is about, whether they're using the SAMR model and how they're redefining what's happening in the classroom. And that shouldn't be the school board that does that. And I think that, on this committee, I think that conversation actually starts. Because, they're going to talk about instruction. You can't talk about one without the other. And we've probably had, 6 hours of meetings just about this technology advisory over the last 2 weeks, trying to get ready to make sure it's a really thoughtful process. So, I just share that. I think just for the school board to say they're going to come in and rewrite the plan is unrealistic, and it shouldn't be the way that it's done. It
To be
needs
clear,
come
I
from
did not
staff.
say that.
Okay.
I never said that.
Okay, then I'm misunderstanding what you're saying when you're talking, because the school board, I hope, will attend those meetings and those district advisory meetings, which I think we talked about at the last meeting. So if I did not understand you correctly, that's what I heard you say. So I apologize for that.
I did not say that.
Okay, general feeling about whether we just vote tonight or push it to another week. Obviously, I say we should get this done and get moving since we are in the second week of school. Anyone else? We can delay it for another week, but we can't really do it again. It's already a bit much.
I'd just like to say, I think at this juncture, I think this is, if we want to do something, including these metrics, it really should be for next year's plan. I think doing it at this late date is not a good idea, especially considering everything we have on our plates.
Okay.
Are these subject to amendment if we can spare a few minutes at any point?
Yeah, let's face it, if our priorities were to change,
If
we could change them. Hopefully we wouldn't suddenly change major things in the middle of the year, but
no, it's not the priorities as much as if do we have the ability to make amendments sometime during the school year?
we always do. But we have to remember that if we tell staff to go in one direction for this year and they start going down that direction, we need to think very hard about whether we change that direction.
That's fine. Okay.
So, anyone else? Aaron, Lawrence?
The only comment I would make is that maybe we should, if we want to go through it in more detail, we should start the process much earlier in the summer. We shouldn't do it the day that school starts. You know, so I mean, we shot ourselves in the foot for this. So I agree with Mr. Reidinger's points. But I also think, at the same time, I think that we have to move forward this year and take as a learning, lesson from what happened this year, and next year say, listen, we have to start, if we want to take ownership of this, we got to start this process in like June. And that way we have time to go through it at a pace that is reasonable. Work with staff when they come back in August to refine it and really understand what they need and go from there.
And to be fair, in the past we spent a lot of time going through line by line by line. And I think this year we just got overtaken by events. So, anyone else? No? Okay. Then, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we vote on it today. Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve the FY17, FY19 staff work plan and triennial plan as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. All right, any discussion? No? All right. We don't need a roll call, do we? No. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Abstain? Okay. All right. Thank you. On to construction update.
Just the two projects, obviously, that we have going. Mount Daniel will be back in front of the Planning Commission tomorrow night. That meeting does start at 8:15. People can watch it live stream if they have an interest. It's not a hearing where everyone comes and speaks, but the construction team and obviously are the folks that are there for us are there just to answer questions if the Planning Commission should have some. And we will, as we always do, send out a Mount Daniel update probably that next morning just to let people know what happens tomorrow night for the people that don't want to stay up late and watch TV. The GM-MEH project is working with the consultant firm. They have started their work in preparation for the first joint meeting, which is coming up in, I don't have it in front of me, just a few weeks. But again, they have started their work. They're starting to reach out and make those phone calls where they're really talking to key stakeholders about the questions that people have on the project. So I think that that's going to be a good step forward, and we're really happy that that's moving now. So that's all I have on construction.
All right, thank you. Any questions? No? All right. Moving on, future agenda items. We don't have a list this time.
Yeah, I need to update that. We'll get that at our next meeting. We've had to do a lot of shuffling over the last couple of weeks, so every time we think we get it set, we actually shuffle again because
Right.
we've pushed things off, but I'll bring you that list again.
All right,
Yep.
let's be real blunt. We've pushed things off that you've brought to us, so sorry about that.
Sorry.
But also, does anybody have anything else to add to the already too long list?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not something to add, but when the prior review question came up for the LASSO a few weeks ago, I suggested that might be, because we were so busy, it might be a great project for a journalism class or somebody else to try to come up with something that might be a little bit less strict, but met the requirements for ensuring that there's not bullying and those sorts of things. I don't think we're going to get to that independently. I think that would be a wonderful way for our George Mason students to say, well, you guys want a different policy. Give us something other than we can publish whatever we want, when we want. Come up with a policy that we'll take a look at. So we talked a little bit before about subcommittees. This isn't a subcommittee, but it is asking, basically a school to come up with a proposal that the school board could consider. We could reject it or not. And I'd like to see that proceed if that's something possible, because it feels to me like a missed opportunity if we don't.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say Kate Karstens, who's the one that initiated that, and I are playing email tag. So she reached out, oh gosh, probably 2 weeks ago. It was the first week of school, like first day of school almost. And we missed each other. I actually reached out to her again just yesterday, but we plan on connecting, and I'll follow it up in that direction. I thought that was a great idea.
Kate has actually already drafted a policy. I met with her a couple weeks ago. So she has gone through a conference, and she's worked on it with other journalistic organizations, and she's got it together, and she plans to present it at our October public meeting. So she'll send it out in advance. She plans to comment at that meeting, so a month from now. She can't make it before then because she has volleyball.
Okay, but she's not going to circulate it to us beforehand.
She'll circulate it before her comment. She's just waiting. She didn't want to send it a month in advance, and then everybody forgets about it, and then she comes to comment, and nobody said she has to read it, so she'll send it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think just given our schedules, I think sending it sooner rather than later and then reminding us that we have it would probably be better than waiting to send it
Yeah,
closer.
I can reach out to her. She's an extraordinarily accomplished young lady who's also running the marathon in addition to everything else she's doing. So I'm sure she would send it to us right now.
Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, no, that's at the end.
Okay.
All right, sorry. Superintendent's report.
Well, obviously, school is off and running, and things are going really well. Probably, and this kind of goes along with what we talked about last week, disposition of public comment, because it was on my list to talk about buses. And so that can kind of answer some of his questions tonight from the gentleman who gave public comment. We have really struggled with buses this year, and I have emailed the school board, I think at least 2 or 3 different times about it. The first day or two, our top priority was pre-K, and there are lots of issues with little ones. When you put little ones on the bus, they don't know where to get off, so it just takes a long time to run routes the first week or so. Also, when you have a bus that is wheelchair accessible, you have to get off the bus, load the wheelchair. So we've worked through all the pre-K issues. We feel like those routes are running great. Mount Daniel was a huge priority for us on traffic mitigation, and they've done a phenomenal job. We have not had one car parked on Oak Street yet. Knock on wood, let's not mess it up tomorrow, but we hope parents will keep putting their kiddos on the bus, and we've really worked with our parking situation there. The buses at middle school and high school are the focus right now, and I was out timing this morning as well as Mr. Hills and also Mr. Harris. Again this afternoon, we were all connecting. I was actually getting kind of minute-by-minute updates when the buses were arriving at GM today. They have about 60% of the buses are coming when they're supposed to be there for the high school. And I actually had mentioned to Mr. Kimball just before this meeting, we may be adding another bus by tomorrow, because our 2 last buses, it just has to do with the routes that they're running, and really it can be 3 depending on the day, are getting there too late. And so we've got to make an adjustment there. And hopefully
Adding meaning adding a
Another
bus to
bus.
the route that we already have, not buying a new bus.
Right, not buying a new bus. It's adding a bus that's not running an MEH route. That's really what it is, because it all has to do with timing. And the city is challenging this year, and it was this way last year too, but I think even more so this year. A lot of single-family home construction. We have, construction down by the Maple area with that development. And what happens on these routes is we may only be 2.2 square miles, but between Broad Street traffic, the backups that you get on West Street, you just don't really know on any given day. And they try to, the first 2 weeks, it's very difficult to time. None of the after-school activities have started yet. Once the after-school activities start, your buses start, you lose a huge chunk of your kids because they're staying after school for clubs and things. We're seeing that now, and that starts to kind of mitigate a little bit of the problem. So it's hard to assess in the first 2 weeks how we're actually doing, but we know that we do have a couple of buses that we've got to get them in there earlier. So that's part of and it's really a George Mason issue, not a MEH issue. MEHs are running good. All of our buses are on time in the morning for GM and MEH, except MEH has one bus G, that is getting there right when the bell rings if they get stuck. And you're nodding your head. I was there when we were making the announcement today. And bus G, it just happens to be where they're coming from in the city. And so they'll be on time Monday and then not be on time Tuesday. So we continue to make adjustments. And what we do is we'll move like one of the stops to another bus, trying to shorten the route a little bit. So we're assessing all of that for MEH and GM right now. The GM's drop-off time in the morning, just so you know, that has not changed for us. And you'll have parents, and it's just because we have coordinated the schedules, especially if they have freshmen, they don't realize. The first bus does roll in around 7:30, and then they roll in all the way in up until about 7:45, 7:50, and that is normal for us. It's not a change from previous years. And a lot of people don't realize in Falls Church, we use the same bus fleet to run each route. So in some school districts, you'll have double the fleet, and you could run your elementary and your middle at the same time. But because of that, it's a huge, time crunch. And if one bus is late, you can be late for instance, your elementary route by 5 minutes, and it's hard sometimes to make up that time. But again, they're actually doing really well. The one issue is GM at the end of the day, and it is not all of the buses. Today, we were doing really good timing getting the first set of buses in. And I think that's all I really had. Again, Mount Daniel did a terrific job on their traffic mitigation, which was great. And all of our parent nights, those are all either have come up or they've taken place. TJ's was tonight. Their first one was tonight. And so we're looking forward to getting just kind of back into norm, which is happening quick. So that's it.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Oh, you know what, I was going to, because it was disposition of public comment, I also, with Mrs. Kuchma's question, we have answered that question before. We answered it back in 2015 the first time. I will get that answer back out again. And it really had to do, that year, there was no money moved or anything like that. It had to do with the enrollment projections that year. That, and anyone that was on the board will remember, kindergarten was projected, a Weldon Cooper projection, and came in, Mr. Kimball, do you remember, at least 50 kids, probably less, and there's still a tiny class moving through the cohort, but that was really the additional 50 kids that had been built in the budget. But that's not money that was wasted, or we didn't take that money and do other things. We hired staff. And we actually had 16 or 17 kindergartners in a class. And then the school board came back the next year in order to correct a little bit of that where the numbers were lower. And we actually cut, was it 4 positions, Mr. Kimball, that following year?
It was.
I think it was
we
4.
reduced them.
We reduced 4 positions to kind of tighten up again where we had a little bit of cushion. So, and we'll get that answer back out again. Again, it's, we've had it out there before. We'll put it out again.
All right, thank you. Now, any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Moving on to board and student liaison comments. Margaret, I know you need to leave, so why don't we start with you?
Well, ESOL is going to be meeting the first time this school year on, what day was it? Lisa, would you help me out? October 6th, that's what I thought. Let me just get you some athletic boosters. They're meeting actually tomorrow night for the first time this school year. They did meet over the summer. But I'll give you a little update what's going on. If anyone is interested, the fan shop is open. You can buy your spirit wear. I don't have the link handy, but I'm sure I can get it for you if anyone wants it. Boosters membership and game vouchers are also on sale. You can also make donations to the scholarships. They have Bill Rose Fund and the Judy Lubnow Scholarship Fund, both really wonderful scholarships for athletes. And then there's also the Athletic Boosters Fund. The Athletic Boosters, as you probably know, does fund like 6 scholarships, I believe. Is that right? 6. And if you do want to get some spirit wear, you got to get in by September 23rd. So that's the deadline for the fall spirit wear. And homecoming, October 21st. Mark it on your calendars. That's it.
Michael?
Upcoming meetings for GM, PT, SA, PEAK, and GT, so I'll be attending those in the coming few weeks. I was at the Chamber of Commerce board meeting this morning. Lots of business. There's lots of legislative issues, a couple of ribbon cuttings coming up, and a series on Business Express for small business enterprises, but that was pretty much the agenda for today. So I'll update the board on more of the school-related PTSA, PEAK, and GT meetings after we've had them in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you. Phil?
The only thing I mentioned, I think, for tonight is that I was able to attend I was able to attend the tailgate party before the first football game, and that was a lot of fun. All of the SAOs were there, running raffles and doing other fun things. I will say my favorite part of the evening, though, was the Meet the Principals table, because most of the principals or assistant principals, both new and old, were clustered around in there at some time or other. So it was a real opportunity for parents to come through and meet not only the principals that are at their kids' current schools, but at their future schools as well. And so I thought that was well done and very much appreciated by the people who were there.
Okay, great. Aaron? Nope. Lawrence?
Two things. One, what a great win by the football team last Friday night after a fairly rocky start to the game, but Thankfully, as a couple of parents who were sitting next to me, we must have a great strength and conditioning coach because Sidwell's guys looked pretty daggone tired come second half versus our guys being fresh, and a couple of kickoffs that kind of bounced our way that kind of helped along the way there. Just for Mr. Horn, if you can get before you leave, if you can just get some hedge clippers out there to cut the limb that's in front of the home scores on the scoreboard before you leave. Get your hedge clippers out there to cut that down so we can see the home score. So that'll be a good something too. And then finally, I did hear. I was not able to go to the Parks and Recs meeting, but I did hear from them, and they have a lot of questions about the Madison Park. Which I on purpose, it was not on purpose that I didn't go, but I kind of knew that if I was going to be there, I was going to get an earful, and I not being there and got a phone call and got an earful about their displeasure of that particular look, and I told them that that we would, I would keep them informed as we get designs, and so that they can, if they want to make comments to us about that, and at any point that they can. But I did inform them that I gave a bit of a heads up to the board that when the conversation was had before, that it was not a well-received conversation. So they do know that we know that the board as a whole knows that it's not one that's very well received, and they're not very happy about. Okay, so I will keep them informed in the next 2 weeks that they will be discussing it again. So in case they want to be here, that we can give them a heads up for that. All right, that's it.
All right, thank you. Sir, welcome to not your first meeting, but sort of your first official for the year. So at this point, anything you'd like us to know or you'd like to report, as school kicks off, you'll have more games and things like that, but anything that's happened or that is coming up, feel free to tell us anything you'd like.
Actually, there's one big thing that I actually want to mention tonight. I don't know if any of you have read The Lasso in the past week or so, but I can't remember the name of the author. There's been a new change in policy, how they're making everything stricter. And the student body, I've had a couple of students come up to me, I think yesterday and the day before, the week prior. They're concerned on how, I guess they feel like the student body's being patronized in a sense, being treated more like middle schoolers than we are being treated adults. One example that I was given is, if you have an unexcused, they want to try and implement detention with that. One student came to me and said, they asked what would happen during college visits, which is, something that George Mason tries to do. And, Mr. Hills said that the likelihood would be that even if you do go on a college visit and it's approved by your teachers, you would still have to serve detention, which makes students wonder, why are we going to go see college if we're just going to be punished for it? So it's slowly becoming a concern to the student body of George Mason that, would like to be addressed. So besides that, it's about it.
Okay. That's an odd one. If you could let us know. Hopefully it's just a communication issue.
Yeah, we're all together tomorrow, so we can discuss that. I also had a student share with me the cell phone change. So I'm a little bit aware, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay, as the new, well, not a new parent, but as a new high school parent, cell phone change? Anything you can do to eliminate them, I support. So anyway, we've been here long enough. Just for me, really only one thing. I went to the education board meeting last night, and have you all registered for Run for the Schools? There's the 5K run, there's the walk, and you can do what I did 2 years ago when I decided to wake up late. I just took my dog to the finish line and cheered everybody as they ran across. So for everybody who's watching Run for the Schools this Sunday morning, also Taste of Falls Church on Saturday. This is a great weekend. I think the weather's going to be wonderful, so please sign up, show up. Yes, you will get a T-shirt, and hope to see you all there.
It's not too late to register.
It's not too late to register. They are ready to order new T-shirts, more T-shirts, so everybody register.
Good.
Other than that, for minutes, I would just ask unanimous approval to approve the minutes from June 21, July 19, August 9, and August 23rd. Seeing no objection, so ordered.
Can I point out the materials for board review?
And materials for board review, please.
Yeah, there are 2 items you may be interested in. One is the enrollment. It's just under 27. We lost 13 kids between last week and this week, and we'll go back up again. And that's why we wait until the official date. But we're sitting still right around 2,700. And then you also have the teacher turnover summary. And Lisa went ahead and put 14, 15, and 16 on there, just so you can look at that if you have an interest.
Thank you. Anything else before we adjourn? Seeing none? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.